Chapter 681. No Survivors. The black tidal waters swept across the sky and earth. Even more turbulent than the tide was the terrible pollution that penetrated everywhere. Before people shocked by the terrifying black tide could recover, they hunched over in extreme physical agony. The wizards beside the formation were the first to suffer. Eid, who had just been thinking about using internal parasites to bite together and form chains, writhed painfully on the ground. Holes appeared on his skin surface. The parasites inside his body were tearing at his flesh from within. Soon, beetle-like blue-shelled insects emerged from the holes in his body, then crawled back in. Eid tried to control these parasites with his mental power, but found his mental power was shaking madly like an earthquake, completely disobeying his commands. An eye emerged from the back of Eid's head, but it only peeked out before being overwhelmed by countless beetles. So the eye that had just emerged disappeared behind Eid's head again. The same thing was happening to others. Jiajiagu's body was stretched by invisible forces like noodles people commonly eat, yet his flesh body was strangely not torn apart. Nearby people could only hear his wails. Peyer had flown into the air almost the moment the black tide appeared. Looking at the apocalyptic tragic scene around her, only one thought remained in her mind. Escape. Escape as far as possible. She quickly flew to high altitude, wanting to fly away from Rhine Lake, wanting to fly directly out of the borderland. But just as she broke through the mist-like clouds and tried to leave, she discovered her magic power and spiritual body were no longer obeying commands. A strong whirlwind wrapped around her body, one end clockwise, the other counterclockwise, actually trying to twist Peyer into a ball like wringing a towel. Peyer struggled to break free from her out-of-control magic power's influence, but discovered that even as a third-rank wizard, she was still powerless before the ocean-like magnitude of black tide. Just as Peyer was about to see her own heels, she again heard the voice from the sky. The fear on her face gradually dissipated, and the chaotic magic power became calm. Only it was truly too calm. Peyer looked up at the sky, seeming to see brilliant starry skies beyond the gray overcast. Nebulae and star clusters emitted various colored lights, appearing to be very far from each other yet also interpenetrating. That voice was ethereal and gentle. For the first time hearing this voice, Peyer no longer felt fear but peace. She suddenly understood she shouldn't want to flee from these voices. They were calling to her, and she was also yearning for them. After an unknown amount of time, Saul finally emerged from beneath the Black Sea surface. He forcefully exhaled, yet felt like he had expelled nothing. He opened his eyes. Around him was still a combination of black, white, and gray. Various cries of pain and wails seemed to come from all directions, but listening carefully, it seemed there was only the sound of waves crashing against waves. Saul tried to break free from the tide. The thought had barely formed when he discovered he was already standing on the sea surface. What made his entire body cold was that he hadn't even used any magic power or mental power. He lowered his head and finally saw his current appearance clearly. A completely black skeleton. No muscles, no fascia, no internal organs. Even from the faint reflection in the seawater, through the holes where his eyes should be, he could see his skull was also completely empty. Huffy. He seemed to hear himself breathing fearfully, yet also seemed to hear nothing. After all, he had already lost all organs for breathing. Am I still alive then? Saul looked up in confusion, wanting to seek help or hoping to get answers from others. However, when he looked around, what met his eyes was only a hellish inferno. He saw rows of corpses floating on the sea surface. Not one of these corpses maintained human appearance. Some long, some fat, some segmented, some in pieces. Unknown limbs bubbled white foam, emitting nauseating acidic stench on the sea surface. In the distance was a sea of pale gray fire, a sea of fire burning on the real ocean. Is that Herbert? Has he also mutated? Saul turned his head. He heard his cervical vertebrae make crack-crack sounds, and saw the pure white purity wizard tower like a wax figure, half frozen, half melting. Several noodle-like arms waved toward him, seeming to call for help, but soon drooped down like withered vines, dried and pressed against the tower's outer wall. Huge shadows passed beneath the water surface. Like a giant fish, possibly a snake or monster tentacles. But Saul immediately realized what it was. Little algae. He ran 2 steps on the sea surface, hearing his mouth open and close, but no sound from his throat. But little algae heard Saul's call. It suddenly stopped, then emerged from beneath the sea surface. A huge tentacle tip comparable to a whale shark. It opened its large mouth, revealing sharp black teeth more vicious than a shark's. Between the teeth gaps, Saul saw several corpses that hadn't mutated severely, plus some clothing fragments. And this was just one of its tentacle tips. Soon, second, third, fourth tentacle tips that had similarly split open with bodies in their mouths also emerged from the sea. They all faced Saul. Though they had no eyes, Saul could still feel that sinister watching gaze. Little algae. Saul didn't know if little algae still had sanity, or if mutation had also turned it into a monster. Saul extended his skeletal right arm, waiting for little algae's response. Little algae, indeed, welcomed him enthusiastically. So enthusiastically that one by one they opened their bloody maws, suddenly leaped from the sea surface, and bit down heavily toward Saul. A cold breath exhaled from Saul's mouth. He suddenly opened his eyes, looking at the golden book page before him, frozen on the scene of him being torn and devoured by dozens of giant tentacles. At the edges of the scene were large amounts of unidentifiable corpse fragments and raging fire burning on the sea surface like petroleum. Saul raised his head from the golden book page before him, and the world regained its colors. He was currently standing in the center of a huge magical formation with 100-meter diameter. The formation was surrounded by wizards. He saw Herbert and Peyer floating in the sky, saw Byron standing alongside several consciousness bodies, saw Brando and Jiajiagu raising smiling faces toward him, saw countless unfamiliar faces looking at him with envy, saw the pure white purity wizard tower quietly standing behind the gray-white mushroom forest. Lord Saul. It was Corey's voice. Saul turned back to face directly ahead. Lord Saul, if you're ready, we'll begin. Wait, Saul cried out. But seeing others' puzzled gazes, he suddenly closed his mouth. How to explain, how to clarify? If he said the storm eye was inside his body and would be activated once the formation started, this group of wizards from the Stargate Council and Borderland would definitely choose to seal him along with it, rather than risk activating the storm eye by trying to separate Saul from it. Saul clenched his teeth tightly, even feeling his gums going numb. Can't tell them, but absolutely cannot let the black tide appear again. What should he do? Chapter 682, Expulsion. Wizard Saul, do you feel there's still some problem? Corey seemed to sense Saul's emotional chain and wasn't displeased by the ceremony's delay, just inquired seriously. But she hadn't discovered any abnormalities at all. Saul looked around at the people beside him and didn't choose to completely terminate the ceremony, but apologized to everyone around. Sorry, please wait a moment while I adjust my condition. He took in everyone's expressions around him. He found no abnormalities. Saul also understood that storm eyes were unlikely to be artificially controlled, but being accustomed to thinking one layer deeper, he still paid attention to the expressions of those around him. He closed his eyes, seemingly adjusting his condition, but actually was using mental power to scan his entire body. Originally, before the ceremony began, Saul had already checked his mental and physical condition to avoid problems with poor condition during the ceremony. But obviously, conventional examinations couldn't detect storm eye abnormalities. This time, Saul more seriously examined his entire body, even carefully screening his spiritual body once. At this moment, his body didn't even contain a trace of pollution unique to the borderland. Still haven't found any abnormalities. Saul slowly opened his eyes. The advancement assistance formation beneath his feet had also been checked 3 times, and even when arranging this formation, isolation materials had been placed at the bottom layer to prevent underground pollution from damaging the formation. In the book Page's simulation, the pollution indeed came from within my body, not from the underground formation. But this formation was a trigger that caused the storm eye to activate. Although everyone around was full of doubts, they all knew the importance of advancing to 3rd rank, and no one stepped forward to question. Saul closed his eyes again. This time, he chose to directly enter his consciousness space. The simple circular platform hadn't changed. The dark red hard-covered book above his head hadn't changed, and the surrounding starry sky still flickered like eyes. If the black tide appears from my body, then the storm eye must currently be hidden somewhere. I just never discovered it. Saul lowered his head, light flashing in his eyes. Black tide had also appeared in his consciousness space before. That time, the black tide had nearly submerged him, and finally the diary had driven back the black tide. Of course, the stars might have also silently contributed. Could it have been then? Saul had always thought that the black tide pollution that made him faint had finally been forced into a drop of concentrated pollution source, so there were no remaining troubles. Then could it be that, when the black tide was polluting him, it had already left the hidden danger of a storm eye in his consciousness space? Saul quickly came to the edge of the circular platform. Previously, he had wanted to jump from here, but was stopped by the diary. Obviously, the diary thought his behavior of leaving the platform was fatal. So if I don't leave the platform, would there be no problem? Saul extended one foot, stepping out of the platform, but soon this foot landed on the platform's side. The consciousness space doesn't have distinct up and down. The reason I can stand on the platform isn't because there's gravity below the platform. Saul's body tilted downward, then lifted his other foot. Finally, he was standing steadily on the platform's side. My speculation wasn't wrong. What truly has gravity is this platform, or rather, it's my consciousness wanting to stay on the platform. Saul smiled slightly. Although he was still facing crisis, having his speculation proven true was still delightful. The entire platform wasn't very thick, less than a meter. So Saul walked one step and came to the edge again. He repeated the previous steps, and this time he came to the platform's underside. Everything seemed unchanged around him, was still starry sky and endless darkness, only missing the dark red Death Wizard diary above his head. If not for the lack of the diary blocking overhead, Saul couldn't even distinguish whether he had truly come to the platform's other side. But I haven't found anything here either. Wait. Just as Saul was about to be disappointed by the lack of further discoveries, he suddenly noticed something strange. He tentatively walked forward 2 steps. Nothing special appeared before his eyes, but when Saul's mental power swept over, it discovered some distortion. Because there were no impurities in the consciousness space, looking at the space's interior couldn't reveal where distortion had occurred. But Saul's mental power perception was very keen, and he quickly discovered the abnormality. He swept his mental power over again, more clearly confirming he had found the problem's source. This is the storm eye. Such a small storm eye, besides causing some distortion to mental power, had no other abnormal manifestations. No wonder Saul had completely failed to discover that his consciousness space actually harbored such a devastating weapon. Saul stared at the storm eye, which was smaller than a thumb, slowly narrowing his eyes. He was trying to use consciousness to directly expel the storm eye from his consciousness space. After a moment, his body transformed into tentacles, several tentacles dancing in the air. After another moment, Saul's body reconvened into human form, but slowly became a mass of twisted light. However, the storm eye remained in place, neither expelled one bit nor undergoing other changes. Saul transformed back to his original appearance again. No good. With my power, I currently cannot expel the storm eye from this consciousness space. Borrowing the diary and star's power would very likely work, but currently the storm eye is in a dormant state. They won't actively help me expel it. And in the previous Golden Book page's future simulation, the diary and stars hadn't actively expelled the storm eye, even until Saul had completely mutated. Like previous discoveries, they seemed not to consider black tide fatal to Saul. However, in the end, the black tide had truly caused Saul to mutate. He couldn't confirm whether the black tide had deceived the diary or if there were other reasons. He could only save himself now. Last time I wasn't aware the storm eye was in my body and simply prevented pollution from entering my spiritual body. But with my power, I can't even shake a non-activated storm eye, let alone an activated one. So I still need to use the diary. Having decided, Saul opened his eyes again, having left the consciousness space. At this time, less than a minute had passed in the outside world. So when he opened his eyes, he still saw everyone's puzzled yet inquiring gazes. This time Saul raised his head and said to Corey in the distance, "Ready now. Please activate the formation." Corey nodded, said nothing more, and directly began the formation. Over 100 wizards around simultaneously activated the formations before them. Immediately, the colorful magical reactions played out before Saul again. Others' amazement and envy arrived as expected, but this time, Saul paid even less attention to others. When the first stream of pure magic power entered Saul's body, he immediately abandoned guiding the magic power and entered the consciousness space again. When he appeared on the platform, he found he was still on the platform's backside, and the small storm eye that had been unclear before had actually expanded to a 1-meter diameter whirlwind in an instant. And it was still continuing to expand. But this time, Saul was no longer unprepared. Expel! Rustle, rustle, page-turning sounds rang in Saul's ears as the diary came before Saul in an instant. Golden light mixed with white light enveloped above the diary. At the same time, the surrounding stars also began flashing rapidly. This time, with almost no effort, the storm eye that had expanded to 3 meters in front of him, whoosh, disappeared. Saul had no time to be happy and immediately left the consciousness space. However, just as he opened his eyes, he discovered that above his head, a huge vortex-shaped cloud formation with a diameter approaching 5 meters had appeared. Storm eye. In the distance, Herbert was again the first to discover the anomaly and confirm the storm eye's existence. Chapter 683, Strange White Shadow. After Saul realized the storm eye had separated from his body and appeared in the outside world while still rapidly expanding, he immediately moved away from the formation's center. Saul over here, Pear, who had already descended to the formation's edge, immediately reached out toward Saul. Almost simultaneously, Saul felt a force wrap around his waist and directly lift his entire body up. When Saul cast flight magic again, his traveling speed more than doubled. With his feet landing outside the formation, Saul had no time to thank Pear and directly said to Corey standing on the platform, "Ice lock seal." Corey immediately nodded and took out the mirror that hadn't been used during the last storm eye sealing. Saul turned back to look at the others. Immediately terminate the formation and cut off the energy supply, or the storm eye will erupt quickly. The wizards from the Stargate Council had good quality. Although the suddenly appearing storm eye shocked them, once someone began commanding, they immediately started acting in a well-trained manner. With experience from the last storm eye sealing, Corey directly placed the mirror near the storm eye this time. This time, Saul volunteered to place the mirror. Byron beside him frowned. "Let me go instead." Saul looked at the storm eye in the formation. After the formation was terminated, the storm eye stopped expanding. Saul also breathed a sigh of relief and was in the mood to joke with Byron. "Senior, you can't run as fast as me now." Byron knew Saul was right, but he still frowned tightly. Last time when the storm eye appeared, Saul hadn't let them go, so Byron was seeing a storm eye for the first time. This terrible vortex didn't look very impressive, but it was said that, when it truly erupted, it could kill most of the Borderlands residents. So when the storm eye appeared, everyone would drop everything and seal it at the fastest speed. Although the storm eye had stopped expanding, Byron still felt uneasy. Unable to argue with Saul, he could only join the team arranging the ice lock formation, hopping to speed up progress. Saul also noticed Byron's nervousness. Since replacing his locator, Byron's mental power talent was completely on par with Saul's. Therefore, Saul also valued Byron's intuition highly. But sealing was urgent, and besides Saul, others didn't have the chance to start over. Moreover, this storm eye was closely related to Saul. Although he didn't know when or how it entered his consciousness space, Saul understood that as long as this storm eye wasn't sealed, it would always be a huge hidden danger for him. When carrying the mirror to the designated location, Saul walked very carefully. The storm eye was temporarily quiet but might be disturbed, so when Saul entered the formation range again, he didn't use magic. All magic power stayed obediently in his body. Only his mental power kept watching the storm eye's movements. Until Saul reached the corresponding position and set up the mirror, the storm eye remained motionless. "Excellent!" Some people cheered quietly behind him. Saul's mouth also curved into a smile. Confirming the angle and position were correct, Saul immediately turned around and ran frantically. The sooner he left the formation sealing range, the sooner Corey could activate the ice lock seal. However, just as he ran 2 steps, Corey's expression suddenly changed. What could make a constantly expressionless doll show emotional change? It must be related to the storm eye. Saul's steps didn't stop, but his head twisted back as much as possible. He was shocked to see that the storm eye, which had just been motionless, suddenly began spinning rapidly. And streams of black smoke banged outward from the vortex's center, like someone had detonated a bomb. How could this be? Saul's eyes widened, but his steps didn't dare stop at all. Just now, in the instant I looked back, I seemed to see a white shadow drilling underground. Although he vaguely discovered the abnormal cause, Saul didn't dare approach the storm eye now. Only after completing the sealing could he investigate that white shadow's trail. But Saul had only run back 2 steps when he suddenly heard the sound of surging tides behind him. He directly stopped running and turned back to look at the storm eye. Too fast. Clearly there was no energy input, but the storm eye still completely erupted within seconds of starting to spin again. Saul witnessed firsthand what powerlessness felt like before nature. Being closest to the storm eye, he was also the first person swallowed by the black tidal waves. The instant he was swallowed by the tide, Saul struggled to float upward. He didn't use magic power or spells, because he knew that using magic power in the Black Tide was tantamount to accelerating his own mutation. But despite this, when Saul finally surfaced with great difficulty, he found his vision had lost color again, becoming black, white, and gray. Looking down, sure enough, there wasn't a single piece of good flesh on his entire body. Only this time he surfaced faster, still hanging some internal organs and skin, but these tissues were also melting at extremely fast speed, like putting a snowman over fire to roast. Damn! Saul cursed in frustration. He knew this crisis preview was about to end in failure. But he still tried hard to look around, attempting to find clues for breaking through a third time. But the scene before him soon made Saul grit his teeth. The Black Tide's spreading speed simply couldn't be matched by ordinary wizards. Even though many people chose to run outward the moment the Black Tide appeared, they only bought themselves a few minutes. More terrifyingly, even before the Black Tide spread to their feet, the horrible pollution it emitted had already begun causing people to mutate. These mutations all looked extremely painful, making even someone like Saul, who considered himself mentally resilient, feel heart-wrenching suffocation. Especially when he saw Byron suddenly become a drained fruit and gradually sink underwater. Watching Peyer cry out in panic, but suddenly lose her mind as if looking at the sky, then fall toward the gray sky like falling into the deep sea. Watching the powerful Herbert also burst into flames almost instantly, fire spreading across the western sea surface. Watching the consciousness bodies still desperately struggling to save Saul, but one by one being torn apart, quickly becoming twisted evil spirit fragments. Saul felt all his bones trembling. Clatter, 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 clatter. His upper and lower teeth were also violently colliding, as if someone had stripped off his clothes in an instant and thrown him into an icy river. He was now absolutely certain that it must be that suddenly appearing white shadow that affected the Storm Eye. And all of this was premeditated. Someone knew another Storm Eye would appear. Someone knew this Storm Eye was on Saul's body. Crack! The scene froze and shattered into countless pieces, as if crushing that last trace of luck in Saul's heart into powder. Saul opened his eyes again. Before him were all his friends and strangers with smiles still on their faces and hope still in their eyes. "Wizard Saul, may we begin?" Corey still inquired expressionlessly. "No," Saul took a deep breath and said, "I no longer need the advancement formation's assistance to push open doors." Everyone else looked at Saul in confusion. "I can already complete the advancement on my own." Saul calmly met everyone's gaze. After all, including 2 Golden Book page previews, he had already pushed open the doors within his body 3 times. If he still couldn't do it, fate should abandon him. Chapter 684, I'm Sorry. Herbert and Peyer each stepped forward to examine Saul's physical condition. Although it was uncomfortable having others' mental power directly scan his body, Saul still agreed to the 2 third-rank wizards' examination to prove himself. You can already autonomously open the doors within your body." Peyer bit her teeth, looking at Saul in disbelief. Even Herbert, who always held his chin high, examined Saul with a grave gaze for the first time. "How did you do it?" If there had been an advancement assistance formation, Herbert would still consider Saul a lucky one with decent talent who relied on resources. But he had suddenly achieved self-opening of doors before the advancement formation was activated. This couldn't be described with genius anymore. It had to be called monstrous. Herbert kept a stern face, his heart burning like flames. He had discovered another monster. Peyer beside him also didn't look very good, but mainly because whenever she got close to Saul, she could hear strange voices, which made her very uncomfortable and gave her a feeling of being about to be forced to leave this world. So after confirming Saul's condition, she immediately flew away from the formation. The onlookers around were also amazed, with discussions arising everywhere. On the surface, Saul wore a proud smile as he looked around, seeming to enjoy others' praise and admiration, but actually he was searching for a particular figure. Since this person wanted to use the advancement formation to activate the storm eye within Saul's body, after hearing that Saul could open doors without the formation, their facial expression would definitely be different from others. However, after looking around, Saul surprisingly found no one with abnormal expressions. Either he hadn't seen them, or the other party was also an excellent actor. Herbert also retreated from the magical formation. Corey paused before saying, "The advancement assistance formation." Saul nodded with slight apology. "Sorry, I only just realized I can autonomously complete door opening. This assistance formation. Although I no longer need everyone to help activate the formation, these formation materials still belong to me, right?" Corey couldn't help biting her lip. "Yes, since you've already become a third-rank wizard, you can continue using these materials to consolidate your condition." "Good," Saul nodded. "Then this formation will temporarily remain here." Byron and others were already approaching with surprise and joy to congratulate Saul. However, at this moment, things changed dramatically again. Corey, who had been staring at Saul, suddenly changed expression, her gaze actually showing some fear. Noticing Corey's gaze, Saul's heart suddenly jumped, and he suddenly remembered the white shadow that appeared at the formation center during the last preview. And Corey's gaze fell behind him. Saul's entire body suddenly erupted with an electric light shield. Then he twisted his body, looking backward while dodging to the right. As expected, appearing behind him was indeed the white shadow he had glimpsed earlier. This time, he finally saw the white shadow's appearance clearly. But the white shadow's identity shocked Saul greatly. It was actually Camus. Saul was stunned, but also knew he should immediately distance himself from this strange white shadow that could reactivate a quiet storm eye. He pushed off with both feet, not even having time to cast spells, wanting to leap into the air and then cast flight magic to immediately distance himself. However, Camus's movement was unimaginably fast. She seemed not to be moving but teleporting. A slender gray-white arm suddenly appeared before Saul's eyes, then treated the electric light shield as if it were nothing, suddenly penetrating into Saul's forehead. Saul only felt his forehead turn cool, his entire body seeming to become jelly pudding as the other party easily pierced into his brain. Camus was a soul body. She could indeed overlap with Saul's body. But with Saul's abilities, even evil spirits couldn't possibly affect his consciousness. But Camus became that exception. The other party's arm didn't just enter Saul's forehead. She actually came directly into Saul's consciousness space. Her index finger lightly lifted, pointing at the storm eye beneath the platform. And with just this point, that storm eye suddenly expanded dramatically. The vortex churned, opening pollution switch. Saul immediately felt all the magic power in his body begin, involuntarily surging toward the storm eye. Having failed once before, Saul knew he couldn't control his body's magic power with his own strength now. The storm eye was about to be activated. Keeping the storm eye in his body meant death. Throwing it outside the moment it activated would equally fail to escape pollution. "I'm sorry." As soon as the voice reached his ears, Camus had already disappeared underground, and the electric light shield around his body also vanished due to magic power going out of control. Unexpectedly, the first sentence Camus spoke unrelated to magical discussion was an apology to him. Saul opened his eyes, veins bulging on his forehead. but seeing the scene before him, Saul was again surprised enough to slightly open his mouth. Byron, leading all the consciousness bodies, had actually already run in front of him. They had originally wanted to come congratulate Saul, but after seeing Camus suddenly attack him, they immediately accelerated their approach. Camus disappeared too quickly. These people still maintained their about-to-attack postures. Behind them, Brando and Jiajiagu were also rushing over one after another. Wind blew overhead. That was a sign of Payer about to land. "Don't come over," Saul shouted loudly. "I have a storm eye inside my body and it's already been activated." However, whether Saul shouted too quickly or his voice was too unclear, not one of these people stopped. Saul's heart warmed, his throat somewhat blocked. Damn it, next time I must succeed. Once the storm eye was activated, basically no one present would survive. This preview would definitely fail again. Saul simply prepared to quickly die and restart. However, while Saul had given up, someone else hadn't. When the landing payer asked Saul somewhat incredulously where the storm eye was, Byron, who arrived a step late, actually extended both hands and abruptly pressed them on both sides of Saul's skull. Saul didn't know what Byron was going to do, but saw the other's face change appearance in an instant. From an ordinary older young man to a face with stunning beauty that was breathtaking yet cold as ice. And Saul had actually seen this face before. It was the Elf King's face he had once picked up. With Byron's transformation, a powerful mental power pierced into Saul's skull. Sharp pain instantly contorted Saul's expression, but simultaneously, the frantically spinning storm eye in Saul's consciousness body suddenly reduced its rotation speed. Saul finally realized what Byron was trying to do. He was actually using the elf's powerful mental power to forcibly suppress the storm eye's rotation speed. At the same time, that extremely painful mental power was still trying hard to pull the storm eye out of Saul's consciousness body. And the storm eye was actually being shaken by it. Saul's heart, which had just wanted to give up, instantly lifted. Enduring the severe pain like a chainsaw cutting through his brain, he immediately mobilized the diary's power. One pull, one push, Saul and Byron quickly brought the storm eye outside his body. Then Byron continued suppressing the storm eye and used his gaze to signal Saul to arrange the ceiling formation. Payer beside them, seeing the storm eye emerge from Saul's body, didn't ask what was happening and directly guarded beside Byron and Saul. "If that white shadow appears again, I'll destroy her," Payer said grimly. A guy who only dared to appear quickly, then escape quickly, Payer wasn't afraid of her. Chapter 685, What Are You Waiting For? But Camus seemed to only want to activate the storm eye. After the storm eye began operating, even though it was temporarily suppressed by Byron, she didn't appear again. To save Saul, Byron had unhesitatingly used the Elf King's power. And he used it with all his might. Using power beyond his capacity like this, he would definitely have to pay a considerable price. Saul clearly knew this, so after realizing what Byron was doing, he immediately messaged Corey to have her prepare the ice lock formation. "How does he know I have an ice lock formation?" Though Corey was somewhat puzzled, she still quickly began arranging according to Saul's request. Just as Saul was about to ask Payer to bring Corey's mirror over, he was suddenly dazzled by a blinding light. He hurriedly turned to look, and saw a black crack had suddenly appeared behind Byron. This black crack might not actually be black. It was just that nothing could be seen, so anyone who saw it felt the world was missing a piece, leaving only void. However, colorful halos soon appeared inside the black crack. These halos had irregular curved edges and kept changing, like rippling water patterns. The ever-changing halos vaguely presented a human form. Clusters of halos appeared from behind Byron, protruding several smooth edges like arms or tentacles. Like longing lovers, they caressed from Byron's back up to his shoulders and chest. Elves! A friend's exclamation came from beside him. Saul rushed forward, his arms transforming into tentacles, trying to use soul fishing to drive away the halos behind Byron. But when he felt he had already rushed swiftly to Byron's front, in a moment of distraction, he discovered he had only just lifted the sole of his first foot. Time had slowed down. No, not time. Saul's perception of time had been distorted. This seemed to be an ability unique to elves. Saul had witnessed it once before in the Wizard Tower. Saul's brain seemed to slow down too. His heart desperately wanted to dispel those halos, but could only watch helplessly as Byron was surrounded by the halos, then gradually dragged into the black crevice. And until Byron completely disappeared, he continued using the powerful energy from the Elf King to help Saul control the Storm Eye. After the halos and Byron both disappeared into the black crevice, that crack abruptly vanished. As abruptly as it had appeared, the uncontrolled sluggish feeling disappeared with it. With his consciousness and limbs uncoordinated, Saul staggered and nearly fell. He supported himself against a nearby energy pillar before standing up again. This method doesn't work either. Saul suppressed the turmoil in his heart, breathing deeply to let his rationality return. Without Byron's suppression, the Storm Eye vengefully accelerated its rotation speed. Black tidal waters poured out almost in the blink of an eye. This time, Saul and his friends were the first batch to be swallowed by the black tide. But this time, Saul escaped the black tide even faster than before. Beneath his feet, Anne, Agu, and Herman, who had just used their last rationality to help him break free, transformed into mindless evil spirits amid their wails. The previous tragedy played out once again. Pear soon lost her mind and fell toward the sky. Saul beside her tried to grab her, but found that, whether he grabbed Pear's hand or arm, those body parts would melt like butter meeting a red-hot knife. He simply couldn't hold on to her. "Lord Saul!" A shout came from the distance. Saul turned his head and saw Marsh, appearing for the first time in the Golden Book page. He stood on a huge, inverted mushroom, using another mushroom to paddle through the black tide. But Marsh was now covered with mushrooms. Mushrooms emerged from every opening in his body, growing wildly. Soon, Marsh's paddling motions became stiff. Finally, when he completely transformed into hundreds of mushrooms clustered together, his shouting also disappeared. Saul watched silently. He waved his hand, collecting all the consciousness bodies that had become evil spirits into the diary. But the black book pages they transformed into were in tatters. No silver text appeared on the pages either. Saul waved his hand again, trying to retrieve Marsh's soul, but found the other was too far away. Saul no longer felt angry or pained. He turned toward another direction. Next, Herbert should also mutate. Sure enough, firelight soon illuminated Saul's face, which had become a black skeleton. After Herbert mutates, others will quickly die too. Wait, that's not right. Saul's neck suddenly turned, his cervical bones crackling. How could Herbert mutate even faster than other low-rank wizards? Previously, Saul had either emerged too late or hadn't paid attention to that area, actually never noticing that Herbert's mutation speed was wrong. It was as if he hadn't struggled at all, actively dropping all defenses and letting the black tide pollution take him. This time, Saul didn't try to escape, but used his remaining obedient magic power to summon the giant bird Diu-Diu, which was anxiously circling in the sky. Diu-Diu was obviously also affected by the black tide. When Saul asked it to lower its tendrils to pull him to the sea of fire, what Diu-Diu lowered were dense masses of tendrils like centipede legs. The sight made all of Saul's bones go numb. However, Diu's flight didn't rely on magic power, so this function hadn't been lost yet. Saul reached out to grab the hanging tendrils, and the other tendrils began trying to drill into his skin. Of course, they failed since Saul no longer had skin. With Diu's vigorous wing flapping, Saul finally reached above the flaming sea surface. And he finally saw clearly what was happening here. Red flames were indeed burning above the black tide, but they weren't touching the black tide at all. They were burning on layers of melted, rotting corpses floating on the water surface. The corpses undulated with the waves, and the fires connected on top kept changing form, finally forming a terrifying, demonic smiling face. Herbert in this state isn't mutated. Saul finally understood. He's burning other people's lives to provide power for himself, maintaining his sanity this way. If Herbert in this state wasn't mutated, then in the prophetic dream, hadn't he been polluted and mutated either? So, Saul heard another familiar voice. He scanned the flames below and finally saw Brando's head in a corner. Brando's body was currently burning, but his head seemed protected by that helmet and hadn't been ignited yet. "Save me," Brando painfully called to Saul for help. Saul clearly knew that in the Golden Book pages preview scenarios, saving people was meaningless. But he still rushed down. But Herbert's flames suddenly lashed over. "The dead here should be enough for you to leave." Saul had been vigilant about the flames and now controlled Diu to barely dodge. Herbert said nothing, just sent over several more fire whips. Fortunately, he was also struggling against pollution, so couldn't focus on attacking Saul. Saul dodged again, his eyeless sockets already ice cold. "Every time you transform into flames, but now it seems you clearly still have strength to leave. But you just pretend to be polluted and keep burning here. Why don't you leave? What are you waiting for? What are you looking for? That's it, you're waiting for the storm eye to erupt. You're waiting for anchor points to appear." The flames froze for a moment, then suddenly launched a fierce attack on Saul. Saul jumped away again, but Diu was ignited. Screech! It let out a wail. Then all its tendrils suddenly exerted force together, flinging Saul far away before the flames could completely spread. Then the pale yellow giant bird became a large ball of bright flame, crashing into the black tide with sizzling sounds. Chapter 686, Death. Herbert had never intended to seal the storm eye from the beginning. He wanted to take the supposedly very important anchor points after the storm eye erupted. Although the preview had helped him discover another enemy, Saul's mood hadn't improved. The other party had shown no abnormal actions when sealing the storm eye at Old Days Manor before, so why had he prepared to preserve his life this time and actively delayed? What made the Firefly Lord of the Borderland change his mind? Since the other party was prepared, was he in league with Camus? But Herbert shouldn't have seen Camus. Only a few people had seen Camus. Without Diu, Saul was still falling while the flames continued burning. A silver butterfly rushed out from Saul's forehead. Penny was taking a risk to deal with Herbert. If it could temporarily put Herbert to sleep, perhaps Saul could find a way to escape. Although it knew that hypnotizing a third-rank wizard was almost impossible, it could only hope the other party's strength had greatly diminished due to being entangled by black tide pollution. However, the gracefully rising butterfly was suddenly caught by its wings, by a pale hand before it could approach Herbert. A figure walked out from the flames. Of everyone present, only he hadn't mutated and maintained his original appearance. Kismet. Saul was stunned. He really hadn't expected Kismet to be here too. Because in the previous 2 times, Kismet hadn't appeared even until Saul was completely mutated by pollution. Splash! Saul fell into the black tide, struggling to grab a corpse to float, but the pollution was also intensifying. Is this also your setup? Kismet obviously recognized Saul, who had become a black skeleton. He smiled and crouched down, so Saul wouldn't have to look up so painfully. I don't have the ability to create a real storm eye yet, but I can make some arrangements to gather everyone together. One of his hands still held Penny. The butterfly struggled to break free, but though it normally couldn't be touched by ordinary people, Kismet held it firmly. What exactly are you trying to do? Do you want everyone to die? Kismet shook his head. I don't want you to die. As for the others, that doesn't matter. He looked up at the distant storm eye, whose twisting power had turned this place into a living hell. Flames licked at his clothes but didn't ignite them. Obviously, Kismet was enjoying Herbert's protection. While the two talked, Herbert also stopped attacking Saul. They had reached some agreement unknown to others. Saul felt his consciousness beginning to blur. He knew that before long, this preview would also end. But even though he could start over, he wasn't willing to end it like this. Saul ignored Kismet and turned toward Herbert. He wanted to try directly killing Herbert here. Using his trump card, Mental Battlefield. Now he had 1 foot in the third-rank threshold, but in terms of strength, there was definitely still a big gap between him and Herbert. But it wasn't impossible to try. If you interfere again, I'll kill you too. This sentence was for Kismet. The latter raised his eyebrows and pouted, looking aggrieved. Saul was certain Kismet wouldn't attack him personally, and extended both hands toward Herbert. With his hands open, thumbs and index fingers facing each other, a black micro-magical formation suddenly appeared between his finger bones. Saul had originally inscribed the mental battlefield formation on his tongue, but now he no longer had a tongue. But it didn't matter. Having completed door opening, he could completely use magic power from the air to instantly construct a formation he was very familiar with. Although due to pollution and distortion effects, this formation only appeared for an instant. But that instant was enough. The unconscious black mass could no longer float on the water surface and began slowly sinking. But before it completely submerged, Kismet reached out and grabbed Saul's shoulder blade, preventing Saul from sinking. Penny, who had been struggling, was stunned with surprise. Who exactly are you? Why do you sometimes harm Brother Saul and sometimes save him? But Kismet didn't answer Penny. He just stared at Saul. Another moment passed. Perhaps only 3 breaths' time. The flames under Kismet's feet suddenly changed from red to black, their heat suddenly increasing. In an instant, they ignited Kismet's skin. His body also began emitting the same burnt smell as the other corpses on the water surface. But Kismet was smiling. You succeeded. You killed Herbert, a powerful third rank. He also fell into the black tide. But the flames on his body didn't extinguish. Instead, they burned more fiercely. The black skeleton suddenly moved, breaking free from Kismet's grasp. You actually helped Herbert. Several eyes suddenly sprouted from Saul's skeleton, their iridescent pupils joining Saul's eye sockets in staring at Kismet. Saul hadn't had much advantage in the mental battlefield. To kill Herbert, he had sought help from the stars. The stars directly polluted Herbert, faster than the black tide. After Herbert was killed, Saul used the diary to collect his soul, quickly understanding what the other had done. But the stars also began polluting Saul, once again turning him into an aggregate of eyes. Saul could only come out quickly. Having roughly understood the course of events, he angrily looked at Kismet, who had become a humanoid flame with all 4 limbs burned and melted. How did you know the real Storm Eye was under the wizard tower? Herbert was just being used by you, wasn't he? The world in Saul's eyes was already turning black. He knew the preview was about to end. He hurriedly asked the question he most wanted to ask. How can I avoid such a fate? Kismet's voice also became unclear, but Saul still heard his answer. If you just want to survive, you can escape after forcing out the storm eye at the very beginning. But if you want to do more, if you want to break this fate, you must face fate directly. Darkness descended. The scene froze. Saul opened his eyes again, looking at the massive magical formation before him and the familiar and unfamiliar people around him. The diary in his mind opened, the second golden page still frozen on the image of the burning Kismet, and Saul reduced to a black skeleton. Saul suddenly understood. The golden page preview had ended. There were fewer preview opportunities than the first page. It should be because this preview involved people and things that were too powerful. Even the diary couldn't preview infinitely. Saul understood that now was the time for the final choice. A compass shaped like a pocket watch silently fell into his palm. If he only wanted to survive, he could have the diary push the just-awakened storm eye out of his body after activating it, then immediately ride due to escape and enter the chaos realm in a place far from the storm eye's twisting power. Doing this, he had a high probability of surviving. The golden page had no more preview opportunities. This might be the best choice. But Saul didn't do this. He looked around, his gaze sweeping over face after face. What if I don't run? Saul asked silently in his heart. Death. The diary opened to a white page, giving Saul a simple answer. Too lazy to even mark the date. Saul smiled. Chapter 687, What You Say Doesn't Count. Wizard Saul, if you're ready, we'll begin. In the distance, Corey asked similar words to those in the golden page preview. Saul still wore a smile on his face. Please wait. He suddenly flew up and landed beside Corey. I'd like to make a deal with you first. Corey didn't understand why he suddenly wanted to make a deal at such a crucial moment. Saul switched to secret speech. Wizard Corey, I want to trade the quick calculation formula for ice lock formation angles and multipliers for the ice lock formation mirror and sealing materials you brought. Corey was stunned. How do you know I have them? Saul just smiled without responding. Corey's eyeballs rolled around, the kind where the pupils rolled in and out. All right, I indeed wouldn't casually leave such important things in temporary lodgings, but why are you asking me for them now? I'm afraid I might not see you again later. Corey obviously heard this wasn't the truth, but she also understood Saul wouldn't tell the truth. After sealing the storm eye at Old Days Manor last time, she had really wanted to know what formula Saul had mentioned. It was just that the two had just finished competing then, so she couldn't bring herself to ask, thinking maybe she could trade for it later. She hadn't expected the opportunity to arise today. Although the materials Corey had prepared for sealing the storm eye were priceless, everything was cheap before knowledge. She immediately nodded in agreement. Good, let's exchange. The two secretly completed the exchange before Saul flew back to the formation center. We can begin, Saul announced loudly. Over 100 wizards busied themselves, while excitement appeared on the spectators' faces. They were about to witness a grand spectacle that happened once in a century. The advancement formation lit up from outside to inside, the colorful magical reactions making Byron, who was watching, unable to help but smile slightly. Saul probably thinks such a formation isn't solemn at all, right? Laypeople watch for excitement, experts watch for technique. Payer suddenly frowned. Has he already opened the doors? She could sense that magic power was already frantically surging into Saul's body from inside the formation. But the current formation clearly hadn't reached the step of helping Saul push open doors. Herbert leaned forward. He's already opened the doors. He can independently complete door opening without relying on magical formations. The two exchanged glances, their expressions complex and unclear. However, just as they were shocked, Saul's hands suddenly moved rapidly, directly drawing a magical formation in the air, while the magic power entering his body was also being quickly utilized by him. What is he trying to do? When everyone was puzzled, Saul suddenly placed the completed magical formation on himself. Then, like a lit firework, he whooshed up into the sky. The crowd was in uproar. Herbert was first puzzled, then furious. He's running away. He won't run, Kismet's voice sounded behind Herbert. Kismet had disguised himself as Herbert's subordinate, always standing behind him. He's facing fate directly. His gaze followed Saul, tilting his head to the limit. Kismet didn't care at all that his appearance wasn't elegant. Herbert wanted to chase after him but didn't dare get too close to Saul, so he could only grit his teeth and maintain surface composure. Saul can't escape. I told you he's not running. Kismet was somewhat impatient. Seeing Kismet's attitude, Herbert turned back to glare at him, but Kismet didn't care at all and continued watching Saul. At this moment, black smoke suddenly erupted from Saul's body. A trembling, twisting power appeared. The wizards who could be present here mostly had some knowledge, and they immediately realized something wrong was happening. Something happened to Saul. Byron immediately wanted to cast flight magic but was pulled back by Anne. Please wait, Lord Byron. Anne's face was also full of unease, but she still decided to follow Saul's instructions. Master told us to stay in place and use all our strength to stabilize our soul bodies. Byron frowned tightly. He felt this was inappropriate but was afraid of accidentally causing trouble for Saul, so he didn't move around. While stabilizing his soul body, his gaze kept watching Saul, who had flown to extreme heights. Saul let his body rise rapidly, while his consciousness had already come to the consciousness platform. Before the activated Storm Eye. Looking at the Storm Eye that had begun growing due to being activated by the advancement formation, before the black tide could pour out, Saul did something even he hadn't expected. He dove in. The moment he entered the Storm Eye's influence range, Saul felt himself beginning to melt. Hair, skin, muscles, organs. Only bones remained, but they were dyed black by the pollution's power. Black tidal waters seemed to have already soaked into his bone marrow. But Saul, already accustomed to this appearance, just silently took out the ice lock formation's mirror and sealing materials. He didn't have time now to arrange a precise formation, but he could construct one out of thin air. Such a formation's power would definitely be weaker. But as long as the multiplier was large enough, there would be no problem. What if the mirror was only 1 millimeter from the Storm Eye? Then even if Saul's constructed formation was less than 10 centimeters from the mirror, the energy would be amplified nearly 100-fold. Of course, because the action point became smaller, the effect would be discounted, but what Saul wanted was precisely that one point at the Storm Eye's very center. The anchor point. He rushed into the Storm Eye, the twisting power rapidly wearing down his sanity. Saul didn't have much time left. He had to endure such great pressure to get his soul body before the anchor point. Black tidal waters came overwhelming, pollution's power mercilessly tearing at Saul's soul. Saul endured this power and continued forward. Suddenly, a white figure also appeared beside him. It was Camus. She had regained the liveliness of a living person, anxiously saying to Saul, "You'll die like this. Let me save you and get you out." But Saul ignored Camus and continued struggling to advance into the Storm Eye's interior. However, just as Camus approached Saul wanting to stop him, Saul suddenly reached out and grabbed Camus's gray-white neck. "You delivered yourself to me." The diary began, rustling as it turned pages. Then, with terror on her face, Camus transformed into a black light and was forced to drill into the diary. She became one of Saul's black book pages. Only this black book page was also flowing with black liquid outward, seemingly not completely under the diary's control. A third-rank wizard's soul shouldn't be able to escape the diary's control. Sure enough, your reliance is the black tide. Saul continued ignoring Camus, who was trying hard to break free from the diary, and took advantage of this opportunity to continue deeper. Silver text appeared on the black book page. Camus, you will die. The pressure ahead was getting greater and greater. Every millimeter Saul advanced was extremely difficult. Fine cracks began appearing on all the bones in his body. What was here was Saul's soul body, not his real body. So these cracks actually meant Saul's soul was being damaged. But he still didn't stop. He was even smiling. You say I'll die, the diary says I'll die. Only just now did I understand what Kismet meant when he asked if I would always listen to the diary. You say escaping would let me live, but Senior would die, Payer would die, Agu and the others would die, Jiajiagu and the others would also die. Only you would be happy, only Herbert would be happy. I'm not happy. Just because you say I'll die means I'll definitely die. What do you say counts? Saul thunderously took a large step forward. The next second, his vision suddenly brightened. He saw the anchor point. Chapter 688, Sealing and Being Sealed. The anchor point had appeared before Saul. It was a tiny white object hidden in a crack. Due to viewing it through an extremely small fissure, Saul could only see a bit of white, so he still didn't know what the anchor point actually was. But the moment he saw it, he understood its nature. That was the anchor point. As long as Saul sealed this crack and prevented the anchor point behind it from emerging, the black tide wouldn't descend upon the borderland. Even if some twisting power leaked out through the storm eye, it wouldn't cause the terrible consequence of no survivors from the preview. As long as Byron and the others followed Saul's instructions, they wouldn't suffer too much harm. This was the method Saul could think of to preserve his friends as much as possible. Of course, the cost was that he would very likely die here. Very likely unable to even complete sealing the storm eye before dying completely from pollution mutation. The diary had already informed Saul of his fate. But this time, Saul didn't plan to believe in fate. After seeing the storm eye, Saul knew his plan had succeeded in 99 steps. Only the last step remained. But this step was incredibly difficult. In Saul's consciousness, the distance between him and the anchor point was just one step away. But he couldn't take that step no matter what. Saul felt as if he were dancing on a high-speed vibrating fragment. His brain was about to be shaken into mush. Despite this, he still used his mental power to protect the mirror and ice lock formation. I need a little more power, Saul thought. But here, who could he turn to for help? Without hesitation, Saul issued a summons. Stars, I need your power. Eyes suddenly appeared on Saul's consciousness body. An eye with a colored pupil appeared under every gap in his skeleton. They were like patches, repairing Saul's broken soul. From previous experiences and what could be seen in the Golden Page previews, even if Saul was polluted by star eyes, he could recover. But doing this definitely had a cost. At the very least, these stars were getting closer and closer to Saul. They had even come to the wizard world through Brando's consciousness body. But perhaps due to being too far from their source, these star eyes didn't display the powerful force that made Saul uneasy. With the star's enhancement, Saul's consciousness suddenly seemed to ignite. But this also generated a lot of heat. He took another half step forward. Saul extended his hand, the mirror at his fingertip only a centimeter from the anchor point. But this wasn't enough. At least in Saul's calculations, this distance couldn't guarantee sealing the storm eye. He had no more preview opportunities. Give me more power. Saul struggled to stretch his arm. But it was like hitting transparent bulletproof glass. He couldn't advance an inch. At this time, massive pollution also made Saul's vision flicker between bright and dark. Saul gritted his teeth, his entire soul trembling violently. He knew that if he lost consciousness now, everything would end. Master. Suddenly, the diary turned to another black page. Elegant silver text appeared on it. I think I finally know why I've been unwilling to leave the diary. Morden's words clearly appeared in Saul's mind. I think I was waiting for this moment. The moment you need me. Senior Morden. Saul seemed to realize what the other intended to do in his daze. But more thoughts had been shattered by his soul's trembling, unable to form complete sentences. You don't. But Saul couldn't stop Morden. The other's mind was made up, as if seeking liberation. The black page instantly melted. Black viscous liquid, completely different from the black tide, instantly drilled from the diary into Saul's soul. A sticky, cool mental power with the fragrance of wine surged into Saul's consciousness body, making him instantly clear-headed. And then tears streamed down his face. But with this power's enhancement, Saul finally touched the anchor point. Ice lock seal. Pattering black rainwater fell from the high altitude where Saul was located. These seemingly insignificant raindrops caused collective mutations in powerful wizards the moment they made contact. What is this? Most wizards immediately used magic power to block the unknown rainwater. The rainwater fell on their magic power protection and quickly corroded their magical defenses like strong acid on wood. It's pollution, physical pollution. Soon other wizards understood. More and more wizards realized what was happening. Although they couldn't recognize the storm eye, the pollution's effects were obvious. Some lower-strength wizards already showed abnormal changes. Everyone don't use magic power. Right now, you should stabilize your mental power to protect yourselves. Someone skilled in dealing with pollution immediately informed everyone. Byron's group in the corner had already tightly guarded their spiritual bodies when the black mist appeared. After the black rain fell, they were also affected somewhat, but not enough to completely mutate. Saul seems to know something, Byron said in a low voice. The other consciousness bodies knew some of Saul's abilities from staying in the diary long-term. But they never talked about this. As if they didn't know. Because the black rain fell pitter-patter and didn't affect those present too severely, most wizards began fleeing after realizing the danger. Watching fewer and fewer people on scene, Herbert's expression grew increasingly grim. If not for Saul still being above, he would probably think he couldn't wait for the anchor point. Although Saul seemed to have thought of some method to temporarily delay the Storm Eye's eruption, Herbert, who had witnessed one Storm Eye eruption, wasn't worried. That wasn't a force one person could stop. He wasn't worried that Saul could truly suppress the Storm Eye. He was just somewhat concerned that if people here fled too quickly, he might lack enough corpses to provide power for himself afterward. No one is allowed to escape. Herbert's voice suddenly spread across Rhine Lake. A storm eye has appeared. We must give our all to seal it. Those who flee will be hunted across the entire territory. Storm eye. An uproar arose below as people finally knew what had happened to Saul. Storm eye. Byron and the consciousness bodies looked at each other, shock almost overflowing from their eyes. Are you sure Saul told us to maintain soul stability? Anne swallowed non-existent saliva. Yes, maybe if the storm eye really erupts, we can't escape even if we run. Having been specifically instructed not to go over, Byron was anxiously worried below. He very much wanted to see if he could help Saul, but was afraid of making things worse and harming him. Suddenly hearing Herbert actually wanted to organize people to seal Saul, he could no longer stand it and wanted to fly up, even just to inform Saul of this news. He couldn't let him be completely unprepared. At this time, Brando's group came over. They knew Byron's group's relationship with Saul, so they came to discuss what to do. They definitely had to save him. They absolutely wouldn't watch Saul be sealed as a pollution source. But the black rainwater falling from the sky was increasing, and wizards with insufficient strength were beginning to mutate, becoming grotesquely shaped while accompanied by terrified and painful screams. Corey, who had been stunned all along, finally came to her senses. Risking danger, she flew to Payer's side and whispered, "Saul, he just traded away my backup ice lock formation. What do we do now?" But Herbert, who had been distractedly watching Payer, also heard Corey's words. He immediately flew into a rage. This Saul had it premeditated, damn it, then let him be sealed together with the Storm Eye. Then Herbert's expression became restrained, like a cold, lofty king. "Then we'll use the old method to seal. Fill it with human lives." Chapter 689, Survived. Herbert decided to use the most primitive method to seal the Storm Eye, though it would kill many people. Except for the third-rank and a few second-rank wizards present, everyone else probably wouldn't survive. Payer frowned tightly. She knew this was the best method available after losing the ice lock formation, but she couldn't bring herself to make the decision. Saul's sudden taking of the sealing materials from Corey before the Storm Eye appeared was indeed very suspicious, but Payer still wanted to give Saul a chance to explain. If they immediately began filling with human lives, the Soul Sea mincement technique that had successfully sealed Storm Eyes before, Saul would truly only be able to wait for death. However, Herbert no longer planned to wait for Payer to voice her decision. He suddenly transformed into a sea of fire, directly burning to death a group of low-rank wizards he had brought. Herbert's cold voice came from the flames. "I've already sacrificed the people I brought first. Wind Sprite, how long will you hesitate? If the Storm Eye fully erupts, your hesitation will be your future sin." However, looking at Herbert transformed into a vast expanse of flames, the hesitation in Payer's eyes suddenly disappeared, becoming ice gold. When Saul was secretly talking with Corey, he also sent me a message. Fierce winds began howling, not toward Saul but toward Herbert. The violent wind prevented the flames from spreading to others. Herbert hadn't expected Payer to suddenly attack him. Taken by surprise, he was temporarily surrounded by Payer's fierce winds. "Are you insane? Could Saul's random words make you disregard the Storm Eye, disregard the entire borderland, disregard this world?" Payer said unhurriedly, "Would you like to hear what Saul said?" Without waiting for Herbert's response, she continued, "Saul told me that once you transform into a sea of fire, I should immediately watch whether you use the method of filling with human lives to seal the Storm Eye, or use these people's deaths and souls to protect your own soul body, so you can hold out until the end in black tide pollution." The dancing flames suddenly stilled for a moment, then shook violently. Several flame whips lashed fiercely toward Payer. Their ice lock seal. Saul's hand lightly touched the anchor point, the mirror only millimeters away from it. But just as he used all his strength to activate the seal, Camus, who hadn't yet broken free from the diary, suddenly wrote several rapid lines. These words directly appeared in Saul's mind, making it impossible for him not to read them. "Your choice is wrong. Black tide will inevitably cover the earth, but the world will enter a new chapter because of it. Those staying here are merely futilely delaying black tide's arrival, but those trying to escape are seeking death. Not only are they seeking their own death, they will bring death to this world. The Stargate has appeared. Black tide must descend, or you will all learn what's 10 million times more painful than death." However, Saul completely ignored Camus's lengthy discourse. His magic power had already begun circulating, while mental power was the main driving force of this sealing. He didn't know about any Stargate or escape. He only knew he didn't want to see everyone die miserably under black tide. Just because of a dark future, should they commit suicide at dusk? The sealing power took effect. Mental ice crystals were born under Saul's powerful mental control and quickly began sealing the fissure before him. At this moment, Camus finally broke through the diary, transforming from a black book page back into a gray-white spirit body. But her eyes were now completely black, as deep as black tide. She pressed one hand on Saul's hand. "I can find a way to keep you alive. Afterward, I'll tell you everything, but now you cannot seal the anchor point. The most arrogant one is already trying to contact the Stargate. Once the Stargate is truly opened, this world is finished." Saul ignored Camus. The sealing had reached its final step, with only a pinprick-sized hole remaining in the fissure. At the last moment, Camus gritted her teeth and suddenly transformed into a white light, drilling into the final crack. The anchor point before Saul's eyes suddenly transformed, becoming a liquid-like form. It actually managed to emerge slightly from the hole before the fissure completely closed. Then suddenly drilled into Saul's left hand. Saul's heart raced wildly as the word death, that had appeared in the diary, began haunting his mind again. The next instant, the sealing was complete. The twisting power completely disappeared. The spinning black waves suddenly became calm. Saul felt an extremely strong repulsive force. Like he had become a cannonball, stuffed into a cannon barrel and fired out. He fell heavily from the vortex onto the circular platform. Then the black waves before his eyes completely evaporated, becoming faint black mist that completely dissipated within a few breaths. The black tide was gone. The storm eye was gone. I survived. Saul looked down at his hands. His soul body consciousness body still appeared as a black skeleton. But his left hand, the entire palm had become white bone. This should be the effect of the melted anchor point entering my consciousness body. Tusk, I wonder if there will be major hidden dangers. Despite having another dangerous thing in his body, Saul couldn't help but grin. I survived. His upturned mouth corners slowly turned down. We survived, Senior Morden. Saul closed his eyes and reopened them, leaving the consciousness space, finally returning to his body. The ascending magical formation on him was still carrying him continuously upward, already passing through the overhead clouds. I wonder how everyone below is doing. When I was sealing the storm eye just now, some black tide should have leaked outside my body. There was no choice. Saul could only complete the sealing as quickly as possible then, avoiding more black tide pouring out like seawater. He immediately dispelled the magical formation on his body. Then his entire body began falling. Faster and faster. Saul tried to cast flight magic but failed. Damn, out of magic power. He tried feather fall again but still couldn't cast it. What to do? Didn't bring a parachute. The death in the diary wouldn't represent falling to death, would it? Saul suddenly panicked a bit. Having just experienced that ordeal, he no longer feared death or just wanted to escape. But if he completed sealing the storm eye, only to fall to his death in the end, that would be too embarrassing. Saul's heart hardened as he immediately tried all the power he could still use. Chaos Realm Compass. No good. Distress signal. No good. Calling Diu. No good. Saul suddenly closed his eyes and entered meditation. He saw himself become a mass of intertwined light lines. This was his fate line state. When Saul had practiced at the Purity Wizard Tower, he had seen himself like this. Back then, besides seeing the light lines on himself, He had also seen 2 light lines that didn't belong to him. But this time, there were many light lines around Saul. Nearly 10 of them. He didn't yet understand what these non-belonging light lines meant. But suddenly having a feeling, he raised his hand and selected one. Then, Saul suddenly appeared beside Kismet. Chapter 690, Teleportation. Kismet stood behind Herbert, watching the 2 great third-rank wizards of the borderland fight each other. Herbert is getting anxious. He stood in the flames, but they didn't burn his body. The black tide clearly hadn't fully erupted yet, but Herbert had made his move and been discovered by the wind sprite. Originally, Herbert's plan was to pretend to lose control and mutate when the black tide appeared, then prevent others from sealing the storm eye, and finally steal the anchor points when the black tide fully erupted. Although the anchor points hidden within storm eyes would bring tremendous disaster and massive death, they were double-edged. Their enormous value in magical research made the 2 great wizard factions covet them. If not for the leaders of the 2 wizard factions still having some conscience, they probably wouldn't want to seal storm eyes at all, but would hope for as many storm eyes to appear as possible. Herbert had chosen to be selfish at this moment, trading everyone's lives for 1 anchor point. Unfortunately, plans couldn't keep up with changes. Saul hadn't obediently become the storm eye's sacrifice, and Peyer had actually noticed his little schemes. Kismet knew Herbert now wanted to kill the wind sprite, so no one else present would be his match. Even himself, who had a cooperation agreement with Herbert, had probably long been on his kill list. However, Kismet had never worried about his situation. Even though he now stood in Herbert's protective flames, as if already having his throat grasped. Just as he was boredly waiting for the 2 to decide the outcome, the sound of a snapping string suddenly came from within his body. Twang! The sound was so sharp and piercing that both Peyer and Herbert glanced at Kismet. Twang, 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 twang. More sounds followed from within Kismet's body, as if an explosion had occurred inside him. The expression Kismet had always worn, that of an outsider watching a show, suddenly changed. He spread his hands, looking down at his chest and abdomen, listening to those terrifying sounds, the corners of his mouth uncontrollably rising. Ha ha ha, he succeeded, ha ha, I succeeded. Kismet's nearly manic expression made both Peyer and Herbert's hearts clench simultaneously. This guy, he couldn't have mutated under this level of pollution, could he? Just as the 2 watched Kismet warily, another person suddenly appeared beside him. Very suddenly. As if the previous second that space was empty, and the next second, Saul suddenly stood to Kismet's left. Teleportation. After seeing this scene, Herbert actually abandoned Peyer and launched magic at Saul. A chain-like flame tongue suddenly rose from underground, seemingly wanting to strangle the suddenly appearing person. Peyer was startled. Although Saul could now independently complete door opening, he could only barely be considered to have entered 3rd rank. How could he be Herbert's match? However, just as Peyer was about to drain the air around Saul, his body disappeared again just as the flame tongue was about to surround him. Then he appeared beside Byron. Saul. Byron had been worrying about Saul flying to high altitude, but this guy had suddenly appeared in front of him. Several consciousness bodies happily wanted to surround him, but heard Saul say, "Senior, I'll explain to you all when we get back." Saul looked down at his left hand, his figure disappearing again. This time he appeared beside Peyer. I've pretty much grasped the pattern. Only then did Saul lower his hand and look up at Herbert. You want to kill me? Herbert emerged from the flames, sealing the storm eye. His words stopped abruptly mid-sentence. You, the storm eye, actually. Saul completed it for him. The storm eye has already been sealed by me. Yes, from the moment Saul suddenly appeared beside Kismet, the black raindrops falling from the sky had disappeared. Even the twisting power that had leaked from the storm eye and polluted everyone was gone. No matter how you looked at it, it seemed like the storm eye had already been sealed. But how could one person accomplish this? Peyer no longer thought about how to protect Saul. What did a wizard who could directly accomplish spatial teleportation through his own power, without relying on magical formations or magical tools mean? It meant that from this moment on, Saul's probability of advancing to fourth rank had already far exceeded Peyer's. Peyer bit her lower lip, her eyes following Saul, her gaze unclear whether it was envy or relief. Congratulations, you've already obtained the first key to entering fourth rank. Saul's heart stirred. Just as he was about to turn around and ask more, he noticed in his peripheral vision that Herbert's flame body had instantly become 4 massive fire chains, attacking Saul, Peyer, and Kismet standing at the back. Peyer immediately leaped up while an air barrier surrounded Saul. She still habitually protected Saul, treating him as second rank. The massive fire chain barely grazed past Peyer's shoe sole, striking the transparent barrier. The air wall in front of Saul shook, making the outside scenery tremble with it. Kismet had somehow restrained his manic laughter and run behind Saul, perfectly covered by Peyer's air wall. Peyer outside the air wall faced the frantically attacking Herbert alone. A duel between fire and wind. If the wind wasn't strong enough, it would only become fuel for flames. If fire wasn't strong enough, it would be extinguished by wind. The 2 third ranks fought back and forth outside. Saul turned back to glare at Kismet. Today's events were definitely connected to him. Thinking of those preview endings in the Golden Book pages, and Senior Morden who had ultimately chosen to sacrifice himself to seal the storm eye, Saul truly had killing intent toward Kismet now. Kismet raised an eyebrow, seeming to see Saul's thoughts. He raised both hands with an innocent expression. "Master, I'm just a puppet too. I had no choice." Twang! Suddenly, a sound came from within Kismet's body. "What's that noise?" Kismet quickly showed an excited, pleased smile, with a hint of showing off. "Lines, the sound of breaking." "Lines? Could it be fate lines?" Saul narrowed his eyes, looking at Kismet. He found that the lines extending from the other to his front hadn't broken. Then what lines were they? Or rather, whose lines? Saul snorted coldly and turned away. It wasn't that he wanted to spare Kismet, but dealing with Herbert was more important now. When Saul had landed beside Kismet, he saw Herbert and Peyer were fighting. 9 times out of 10, Herbert's plan to sacrifice everyone here for the anchor points in the storm eye had been exposed. The other party's sudden attempt to kill Saul was obviously like in the Golden Book page previews. He had long known the storm eye was inside Saul. But he still wasn't sure if Saul had truly completely sealed the storm eye. Still holding on to hope, he thought that as long as Saul was severely injured, the storm eye in his body might be reactivated. Peyer protecting Saul also had such concerns. After all, everyone had just discovered that the polluting twisting power was emanating from within Saul's body. Saul stared intently at the battle between Peyer and Herbert. Having just become third rank, he wasn't confident he could defeat Herbert yet. However, taking this opportunity to test his newly controlled ability wouldn't be bad. Chapter 691, Fire Clouds. In Saul's consciousness platform, a circle of intertwined, twisted light lines suddenly appeared. Saul hadn't entered his consciousness body again. This was just a projection of his soul. Ever since his journey through the storm eye, Saul had discovered that while his spiritual body's strength hadn't changed, its resilience had multiplied several times. This meant Saul's spiritual body would be very difficult to damage, twist, or pollute. So he could multitask, projecting his soul onto the consciousness platform while completely abandoning human form, not needing to keep a head to remind himself he was still human. When this mass of twisted light lines appeared in his consciousness space, Saul could clearly see several thin lines surrounding him. 3 of them belonged to Kismet, Peyer, and Byron, respectively. Saul had confirmed this when using teleportation just now. The owners of the other thin lines couldn't be determined by Saul yet, but they were undoubtedly among those close to him. But he wasn't looking at the nearby thin lines now, instead focusing intently on Herbert. Soon he saw a thin line extending skyward above Herbert's head. A thin line extracted from Saul's consciousness body, his gaze lifting upward, gradually fading until it disappeared. At Herbert's overhead line, a thin line suddenly appeared, lightly touching both ends. Saul's figure suddenly vanished and suddenly appeared behind Herbert. At this moment, Herbert's entire body had transformed into flame form, holding a slight advantage in battle against Peyer. But he never relaxed his attention on Saul. Upon discovering Saul's figure had suddenly disappeared, alarms immediately sounded in his mind. Instantly, Herbert's body exploded apart, transforming from unified flames into a cloud-like swarm of fireflies. These fireflies immediately turned to try enveloping Saul. Several black blades instantly appeared beside Saul and attacked the fireflies. Soon over a dozen fireflies were cut in half, immediately self-combusting into ash. But the remaining swarm was still numerous. Saul transformed one hand into soul-fishing tentacles, casually sweeping away dozens of fireflies, but couldn't pull Herbert's soul into the consciousness platform. He even felt like he'd completely missed, not touching the other's soul at all. Be careful, Herbert's state can't be dealt with. As long as one firefly lives, he can't be killed. Seeing Saul rashly emerge to ambush Herbert only to be counterattacked and nearly surrounded, Peyer was extremely anxious. She mobilized air barriers again, wanting to separate Saul and Herbert. Hearing Peyer's reminder, Saul thought, as expected, the higher the rank, the harder it becomes for same-rank wizards to determine victory. These people have extremely powerful offensive and life-saving methods. But Saul never intended to easily resolve Herbert with just these 2 moves. Kismet. At this moment, a cold female voice rang out. Upon hearing this voice, the first to change expression was Herbert, who was preparing to attack Saul. 10,000 fireflies suddenly scattered in all directions, east, west, south, north. This voice that struck terror into Herbert belonged to a 4th-rank wizard, Sky City Lord Ophelia. Saul didn't immediately pursue, but looked toward Kismet within the air barrier. The latter smiled lightly and shook his head, seemingly saying, "Don't worry, I can handle it." What audacity! Saul expressionlessly looked away, sensed briefly, then pursued in one direction. Peyer vigilantly watched Kismet, then hurriedly followed when Saul left. 10,000 fireflies together formed a massive insect cloud. But scattered and distributed throughout a pine forest, each became an inconspicuous existence. A firefly landed among grass, very humanly turning back to look in the direction it came from. The 4th-rank wizard hadn't pursued. Good thing Ophelia wasn't targeting me, so my plan hasn't been completely exposed yet. Herbert breathed a sigh of relief. Now I just need to contact the tribunal, and this matter will be fine. If Herbert had sacrificed everyone in the borderland for anchor points, he would definitely become a target for both the tribunal and Stargate Council. But now that his plan had failed, he didn't need to truly break with the tribunal. At most he'd face some punishment and sign a few more unequal treaties. The Stargate Council and tribunal were in constant opposition, so they couldn't easily move against Herbert, who was affiliated with the tribunal. But Sky City, Lord Ophelia was different. Her avatar coming to the borderland definitely had designs on anchor points too. She might not spare Herbert, who had nearly stolen her target. So when Herbert heard Ophelia's voice, he was so frightened he immediately fled. That moody witch really might kill him if displeased. After fleeing nearly an hour and dispersing countless fireflies, Ophelia shouldn't pursue any more. The firefly Herbert had become gradually enlarged, transforming back into a bald male wizard. He took out his tribunal token, his face showing some unwillingness. After contacting the tribunal, he'd truly have no chance at anchor points. Without anchor points, would he still have the opportunity to become fourth rank? You're not afraid of the tribunal but fear Sky City. At this moment, Saul's figure again appeared behind Herbert. Gray-white tentacles touched Herbert's neck as Saul spoke. However, flames immediately rose from the latter's skin surface. Saul felt like being burned by red-hot metal, hurriedly retracting his tentacles back into his own palms. Seems your tentacle ability isn't just absorbing pollution. Herbert sneered coldly, raising his hand to touch the skin on his neck. You just tried to inject pollution into my body. Herbert's dejection was completely swept away. He'd just been thinking about having to abandon this opportunity, but unexpectedly the target had been bold enough to pursue directly. Is the storm eye slumbering in your soul? Herbert grinned maliciously, pressing his palm with crackling sounds of flames burning wood. Then I'll extract your soul and roast it like a goose, to see if the storm eye can continue staying quiet. He didn't believe Saul could seal the storm eye himself. It must be temporary suppression. This way, the opportunity to seize anchor points might appear before Herbert again. Herbert appeared unhurried on the surface, even in the mood for metaphors, but was actually secretly mobilizing magic power. He wanted to seal this area, preventing Saul from using teleportation again. Though he couldn't teleport, he knew that sealing a wizard's magic power or an entire region's magic fluctuations could prevent easy teleportation. Seeing Herbert about to pounce again, Saul hurriedly shouted, "Don't move." Herbert was stunned and actually stopped. Not because he was obeying Saul, but because the pollution Saul had touched to his neck during the ambush was taking effect. What is this? Herbert touched his neck a second time. He'd clearly expelled the pollution Saul tried to inject. But when he withdrew his hand this time, he found his palm was burning. It's the anchor point you've been longing for. Saul raised his left hand. His ring fingertip was transparent, the bone inside completely black except for a white section at the tip. Herbert's expression changed dramatically. You obtained anchor point fragments. Looking at Saul, his eyes blazed with fury. He desperately wanted to rush forward and seize that white bone, but reason told him to flee immediately. He didn't understand how Saul had managed to preserve anchor point fragments in his fingertip. But he knew this thing absolutely couldn't be touched directly. The escaping pollution power could easily mutate a high-rank wizard. You ambushed me with anchor point fragments. Herbert suddenly realized what Saul had done when appearing behind him. Without waiting for Saul's answer, Herbert again became 10,000 fireflies, flying outward desperately and chaotically. However, it hadn't flown long before suddenly beginning to burn. Every firefly was burning, as if physical division couldn't prevent pollution spread. Moreover, in places Saul couldn't see, in the valley occupied by the Firefly Lord, large numbers of dancing fireflies suddenly began burning simultaneously. They buzzed and rolled, unable to stop the flames spread. Before long, all fireflies in the borderland began burning while flying skyward. Beautiful as fire clouds. Chapter 692, The Stars Took Her Away. Saul looked up expressionlessly at the burning fireflies floating in midair. Those tiny insects, no bigger than a fingertip, burned for a very, very long time. When Peyer found Saul, the burning firefly clusters hadn't completely disappeared yet. She looked at the sky in shock, then at the silently standing Saul, hesitating for a moment before landing on the ground. "You killed Herbert?" Peyer asked, biting her lip. Saul turned his head. "I don't know how this happened either." Yes, Saul wasn't as calm as he appeared. In fact, he was almost bewildered inside. At the final moment of sealing the storm eye, Camus had merged with the white anchor point and suddenly drilled into Saul's fingertip. After that, the twisting pollution brought by the storm eye completely disappeared. The white bit at Saul's fingertip remained quiet and still, as if it truly was just a section of Saul's finger bone. But when Saul teleported beside Herbert and Peyer, watching them fight, his left fingertip suddenly trembled lightly, sending out signals of desire toward the two third-rank wizards. This white finger bone was originally part of an anchor point. When Camus made this part break through the seal at the last moment, she obviously still wanted black tide pollution to continue destroying this world. But after emerging, the white anchor point fragment didn't immediately erupt, instead lying dormant. Saul wasn't too anxious. He'd heard from Peyer that if they couldn't prevent black tide eruption, all fourth-rank wizards would try to seize anchor points. Obviously, these factions had ways to preserve anchor points. Saul just wasn't sure if they'd be willing to share with him. Regardless, he definitely wouldn't ignore it. So Saul had wanted to use his newly mastered teleportation ability to test third-rank wizards, who knew that the moment the anchor point contacted Herbert, it suddenly released a twisting force. This force didn't escape outside Herbert's body, meaning Herbert alone bore the suddenly erupting anchor point. Though it was only for an instant, it immediately put Herbert into a chain mutation state. In any case, Herbert seems to have been directly twisted by some extremely powerful pollution. He had no resistance at all. Peyer frowned tightly beside him. "Based on what you're saying, I can only think of one thing." "Anchor point." Saul turned his head, staring at Peyer's face. "Yes, but anchor points appearing here would mean black tide has fully erupted." Peyer was puzzled. "But there's clearly no twisting force here anymore." She couldn't help looking at Saul with some concern, mental power hovering around him without descending. "Saul, are you certain you've completely sealed the storm eye? Do you need me to help examine you?" "I'm certain, but it's fine if you help examine me too." With Saul's permission, Peyer wanted to help examine Saul's body, completely forgetting how much she'd once feared him. The moment her mental power touched Saul, Peyer suddenly remembered this. Her face turned pale instantly. "What's wrong?" Saul asked halfway before also remembering. "You heard the stars' voices again." "No, I didn't." Just as she was about to deny it, Peyer's voice suddenly became sharp. "No, no." The mental power about to touch Saul immediately withdrew. Peyer covered her ears and tightly closed her eyes, not daring to look at Saul. "Peyer," Saul was startled and quickly examined his left hand. The skin still perfectly wrapped the white finger bone inside, without a trace of black tide pollution escaping. It shouldn't be black tide pollution. Could it be the effect of that slight pollution from before? Saul instantly extended powerful mental power. Previously, due to Peyer's fear, he'd never had a chance to give her a thorough examination. But now Peyer's appearance reminded Saul of how she'd struggled in terror before falling into the starry sky in the Golden Page preview. This made him not dare wait any longer. With me just a step away from Peyer unaffected, the reason for her terror is likely inside Peyer herself. But before Saul could examine her, Peyer in front of him suddenly opened her eyes again. Only this time, her eyes had lost their luster. "No good." Saul immediately reached out to grab Peyer's hand. "That's right, I shouldn't have been hiding," Peyer murmured as if convinced by someone. "I should go there." Peyer's body suddenly rose. As if pulled by reverse gravity, faster and faster. The prepared Saul grabbed her hand firmly, but the hand he caught stretched like rubber. The places his fingers touched left shallow pits, as if Pear had completely become moldable clay from inside out. Saul had to let go. But now, without black tide pollution's influence, Saul's magic power was abundant, and he could mobilize external magic power, directly casting flight magic to its limit and pursuing. However, flight magic had altitude restrictions too. When Saul flew above the second cloud layer, he could no longer ascend. Magic power here had become sparse. Even if Saul wanted to borrow power, he couldn't. He seemed to have reached the boundary of the wizard world. But Pear's speed falling toward the sky didn't decrease, instead accelerating, as if receiving a summons from beyond the world. Why would Pear still mutate? That bit of pollution was comparable to some dangerous places in the borderland. Brother Saul, Penny quietly speculated from within the diary. Could it be? What's affecting Pear isn't pollution. Saul was stunned. He hadn't even considered this possibility. Could it be that in several Golden Page previews, what affected Pear and made her fall toward deep space was never black tide pollution? Not black tide, could it be the stars? Saul even wanted to enter his consciousness space to question the stars inside. But if he did that, he'd completely lose track of Pear. Staring at that beautiful figure getting farther and farther away, Saul suddenly narrowed his eyes. Several white thin lines appeared before him. Most were blurry and far from his body. Only one was clearest. Without hesitation, Saul grasped that thin line. The next second, both Saul and Pear's figures disappeared from high altitude, as if they'd never appeared. At the same time, on the highest mountain range between the Stat and Nefrit continents on Iskaper continent, on the highest watchtower of this highest mountain range, on an inverted pyramid platform floating 100 meters above this watchtower. This was a secret experimental base, not publicly disclosed by the Stargate Council. Except for those entering the watchtower below, no one else could see this inverted pyramid platform. This place was secretly called the Eye of Stars. As a genius of the Stargate Council and capable assistant to Chairman Alec, Murich was now quickly walking down from the Eye of Stars back to the watchtower. Alec was currently sitting atop the watchtower, calmly gazing at the sky. The gravity in the tower's top space had been modified from vertical to horizontal. This was just to satisfy the chairman's special hobby of constantly observing the starry sky. When Murich transferred through the Eye of Stars to the tower top, he also had to pause momentarily to adapt to the gravity change. However, this time his excitement prevented him from adapting much before he held up his report and loudly reported to Chairman Alec. Lord Chairman, we just successfully captured an open Stargate. Though only for an instant, we successfully deployed a target object inside. Murich spoke while walking to Alec's side and kneeling on one knee. Your speculation was correct. When the Storm Eye appeared in the borderland, the Stargate would briefly open once. This time our people sent to the borderland transmitted signals in time, allowing us to seize the opportunity and successfully deploy the target object. By the way, do you know what code name I gave this target object? Murich looked up, his metallic telescope-like protruding eyes gleaming. I called it Anchor Point. Chapter 693, It Follows You. Although Saul was just a teleportation novice, he thought he had mastered this technique quite well. He had rich experience being teleported, and 2 instances of active teleportation experience. But this time was different from all the previous teleportations. It lasted even longer than when Master Gorsa had taken him through the Wizard Tower's interlayers. But subjective duration didn't necessarily mean actual temporal length. When Saul again clearly perceived time and space, he found himself in a peculiar place. Here he could see distant nebulae in the distance, with irregular alternations of light and dark. Around him seemed like smoke, like mist, also like colorful halos. Calling it colorful was actually imprecise, carefully distinguishing. There might be hundreds or thousands of colors. Like all the world's brilliance and shadows were displayed here. "Is this where the elves are? But it doesn't quite seem like it," Saul murmured. He was shocked by the magnificent scenery before him, momentarily forgetting his purpose for coming here. This certainly isn't the elven realm. Saul shuddered violently, like an icy hand suddenly striking his neck. After the shock, his rationality returned. Who's speaking? Payer, where is Payer? Saul looked around but found no people or suspected intelligent beings. But he gradually realized that the speaker seemed to be this space itself. That voice appeared again, though it didn't answer Saul's question. "You came here voluntarily. Do you want to return?" Return? Why did it say that? Did it think Saul came from here? But Saul had no memory of this place. No, wait. When Penny first examined my past, she once saw a world full of colors. Could this be it? Saul vaguely felt this place was related to his transmigration secret and his lost memories. "Do you know me?" "Not exactly, but you did stay here for some time." The voice was slow and prolonged, as if accustomed to solitary yet leisurely life. "So, are you returning?" "No, I just came to find someone. Once I find them, I'll go back." Saul was very cautious. He didn't rashly explore just because this place might be related to his past. Because he discovered this space seemed to lack magic power. Unlike the Chaos Realm, there were no inactive elemental particles here. There were simply no elemental particles at all. Moreover, when Saul examined himself, he found he was now a chaotic tangle of threads. The surrounding space was clean, without a trace of thread ends. How could he return like this? The owner of this voice should know how to leave. Saul pondered, the thread tangle representing him gently writhing. "Find Payer first, then see if I can get the method to leave from them. If you want to leave, I can send you back, but you cannot take that person away." The voice could actually see through Saul's thoughts, even though Saul hadn't transmitted any mental waves. Hearing news of Payer, Saul didn't delve into the reason and hurriedly asked, "Why can't I take Payer away? Does she also have connections to this place? Wasn't the connection between her and this place established by you?" The voice's tone seemed to carry a hint of laughter, or perhaps it was Saul's imagination. "Her fate is set. She cannot continue staying in the world you came from. This is where she can continue living." Saul frowned. Actually, the thread tangle contracted a circle. "Can I see her?" He had to see Payer to know what had happened to her. This time, the voice was silent for a moment. Although Saul's perception of time here wasn't very clear, he could sense the rhythm of the voice's responses was different from before. "I cannot do that either. Not all consciousness bodies can suddenly intrude here and still coalesce into a mass like you." She scattered. Thread tangle Saul was convulsing. "You mean she died, vanished?" "No." This time the voice answered more quickly. "She just scattered, fragmented. But she still has connections and future with you, so later she will reconvene. If given more time, she might coalesce into a small mass like you." The voice again carried a hint of laughter. Saul had the feeling of being praised as cute, but he wasn't happy. "So I can no longer take her back?" "Currently, yes. Moreover, if she continued staying in the world you came from, she would truly dissipate. Her essence isn't stable. The stronger her abilities, the closer she approaches annihilation." Saul could sense the other wasn't lying. Because there was really no need to. How long will Payer need to recover, or rather, coalesce into a mass? By your perception of time, perhaps 100 years, perhaps 100 seconds. The voice answered Saul, but it was like not answering at all. Saul felt somewhat dejected. Thinking carefully, my prophetic dreams actually all came true. Clark lost his eyes. Herbert truly burned up. Peyer fell into this unknown space. And my entire skeleton also turned black from pollution. If you still want to return, don't stay here too long, the voice reminded Saul. Saul quickly gathered his spirits. Can I ask you 3 more questions? Yes. What levels are you? According to your understanding, it could be anything 1st to 6th, or even 7. Saul was silent for a moment before asking his second question. Are the star eyes in my consciousness space related to you? Yes, we have always been watching you. Why? Don't want to say. Saul was stunned. The other had given such a distinctly human response. But knowing time was urgent, he asked instead, will you invade the world I came from? Too far away. Only you like running around everywhere. I'd prefer you just stay here. Ignoring the latter words, Saul breathed a slight sigh of relief. This way, the eyes that had entered the wizard world and attached to his friends should just be unconscious influences from the stars being too powerful. From Saul's understanding of this world now, this world was really very lazy. But you can also see this world's level is very high. Just a bit of distant, minute influence is enough to change a group of people's subconsciousness. Fortunately, I excavated the Fate Line ability from the diary's language capabilities. Otherwise, coming in, I'd probably be like Peyer. No, the voice suddenly interrupted Saul's thoughts again. You didn't learn abilities from that book. It chose to follow you because you possess condensed fate lines. Threadtangle Saul contracted another circle. I originally possessed condensed fate lines. Why? You said I also suddenly appeared in this world, so do you know I? However, this time the voice didn't let Saul finish asking. If you still want to return, go back now. Perhaps time really wasn't enough. Perhaps the voice refused to answer. Saul could only stop inquiring. All right, please send me back. Thank you. Just as the word back finished, the fantastical, colorful world before Saul's eyes vanished with a ding, like an electronic screen shutting off. What appeared before him was the blue sky and white clouds he'd seen before teleporting. At this moment, the words "thank you" appeared in the air and transmitted in all directions as sound waves. Saul looked up. There was no longer any trace of Peyer overhead. Not a trace at all. Chapter 694, Sacrifice, Not Needed. Saul didn't let melancholy affect him for too long. Since Peyer entering that fantastical world was already an established fact, he could only wait and continue to make himself stronger. Perhaps in the future he could still see the silly, soft wind sprite. Having composed his emotions, Saul narrowed his eyes again. Several white semi-transparent thin lines appeared before Saul. Although visually these thin lines all looked the same, as someone whose mental power had become exceptionally strong, Saul could easily distinguish which line belonged to which person closely connected to his fate. He stared at the thin line representing Kismet and pointed at it. However, aside from a dull pain in the back of his head, he received no other feedback. Did the teleportation ability fail? Saul hurriedly examined his spiritual body. Then he discovered with mixed feelings that his mental power consumption had been too great and was now in a state of complete depletion. Staying in the fantastical space had been such a mentally draining experience. No wonder that voice hadn't let Saul stay too long. Now Saul could barely maintain flight status and couldn't control more powerful spells that required mental power guidance. With no choice, he had to slowly land and use meditation to recover. While Saul was recovering in the wilderness, things remained lively at Rhine Lake. Although Saul had tried his best to block the black tide's appearance and quickly sealed the storm eye, Some pollution had still inevitably affected the wizards here through the briefly appearing Storm Eye. To help Saul advance, over 100 wizards had gathered here. The several second-rank wizards here were fine, but the first-rank wizards and wizard apprentices had all been affected to varying degrees. Some people with insufficiently stable and powerful spiritual bodies had even begun mutating. Nearby wizards had to kill the mutated ones to prevent new pollution sources. Although Byron was still a first-rank wizard, his situation was special and he hadn't been greatly affected. He was helping second-rank wizard Brando control several severely injured wizards nearby. At this time, Corey approached with a stern expression. "Wizard Brando, can any of you contact Wizard Saul?" Brando was so busy his head was about to fall off. Hearing this, he said helplessly, "We haven't set up long-distance communication magical tools with Saul." Corey clenched her fists tightly. Earlier, the two third-rank wizards had suddenly turned against each other and fought. Then Saul had followed them to distant places, leaving only Corey to barely maintain order. But the current situation wasn't optimistic. If there was still no way to help those polluted wizards, she would have to kill those beyond saving first. They couldn't wait until most people lost control simultaneously. Then she alone couldn't handle so many mutated first ranks. Moreover, if the mutated wizards directly escaped, the pollution's influence would expand again. Although in the wizard world, quite a few wizards died from mutation due to various reasons, such a large number of deaths at once would be a huge loss for the Stargate Council. However, 100 dead first-rank wizards and wizard apprentices was better than 100 living pollution sources. Corey had decided to gather those showing signs of mutation to prevent accidents. But to prevent anyone from escaping, she needed other second-rank wizards' assistance. So while she was ostensibly asking about Saul, she knew battles between third-rank wizards couldn't end quickly. Thus she secretly used communication magic to ask Brando, "Brando, you know what consequences there would be if all the first-rank wizards present mutated, right?" Brando's expression darkened slightly, but his helmet well concealed his emotional changes. "You want to? Wouldn't that be too hasty? Most people can still maintain stability now. Are you forgetting where this is? If they were in the outside world, they could indeed slowly stabilize and find a safe place to recover. But this is the borderland. Pollution is being generated constantly here, and beneath our feet is the greatest pollution source. Do you think these first-rank wizards struggling to maintain themselves can recover on their own?" Brando's voice lowered another degree. "So you want to kill all first-rank wizards? Is this the Stargate Council's style?" Corey had prepared herself mentally when she spoke. Her emotions were completely steady now, even slightly raising her chin without avoiding Brando's gaze. "Yes, only excellent people have the chance to survive." She looked at Byron, who was busy nearby and not paying attention here. "Of course, first-rank wizards like that one who can resist black tide pollution on their own definitely won't be cleared out." But Brando still shook his head. They still had several first-rank wizards like Eddie here, currently struggling against the pollution within their bodies. "I'm afraid I cannot agree," Corey said unexpectedly. "I thought that as a second-rank wizard, your rationality should exceed your emotions." Brando chuckled softly. "Yes, my rationality tells me it's not yet time to be forced to sacrifice others." "Oh, if it comes to the final moment, are you sure you can control so many mutated wizards?" Brando slowly shook his head. "No, I just believe things won't deteriorate to that extent. Wizard Saul will return to resolve all this. Don't forget, he's the healer of the Purity Wizard Tower, most skilled at treating pollution caused by black tide." Corey really wasn't very clear about this. After all, she didn't care how borderland natives solved the black tide pollution they faced daily. Battles between third-rank wizards aren't as simple as you think. Halfway through her words, suddenly an extremely powerful mental power enveloped everyone. Even the constantly expressionless Corey looked up at the sky with astonished pupils. Even other wizards struggling against internal pollution were affected and looked up. Above everyone's heads, under the dim sky, floated a wizard completely wrapped in a gray wide cloak. Several wizards who could see far enough glimpsed that the other was wrapped in fabric, wearing a hood, not even exposing their eyes. But when his mental power waves transmitted over, everyone immediately recognized him. It was Saul, who had just advanced to third rank and had a storm eye appear in his body. The Stargate Council wizards were still confused, but hope had already bloomed on the faces of local borderland wizards. Byron finally straightened up and shouted loudly, "Lord Saul, please give your orders." Hearing Byron's shout, Saul, floating 30 meters above everyone's heads, twitched the corner of his mouth. "To build momentum for me, Senior actually addressed me like this." But he also understood Byron's intention. The situation seemed stable now, but once the spark of mutation ignited, it would almost instantly turn this place into hell again. Therefore, if Saul wanted to do anything, he had to gain everyone's recognition and trust. Byron's words were reminding others of Saul's identity as a powerful third-rank wizard. At this moment, Saul was the last lifeline. Even if some people secretly resented Saul, after all, the storm eye had appeared inside his body. They had no choice but to seek Saul's help now, hoping for a chance to survive. Therefore, Saul didn't correct Byron's address, but used a serious tone to command unquestionably. "Everyone, stand in the advancement formation. I will cleanse the pollution from your bodies." Chapter 695, New Master. Saul's voice flowed like a sweet spring into the hearts of everyone tormented by pollution. These wizards, who had received no real help and could only endure through sheer willpower, had been waiting for fate's judgment. They never expected someone to voluntarily step forward, claiming they could help absorb their pollution. Some who had heard of Dr. Saul's reputation stood up with a mixture of disbelief and hidden hope. But most people still hesitated. They were afraid. What if this was just a high-ranking wizard who deemed them beyond saving and chose to eliminate them instead? At this moment, Byron and his group were the first to step into the magic formation, demonstrating for those who hesitated. Some wizards and apprentices in serious condition, their minds unstable, followed them in. Then came those in relatively stable condition, who had long heard of Saul's reputation. Of course, a large portion of people still stood in place, unmoving. Their expressions were wary, fearing that what would fall upon them would be a killing blow. Saul didn't wait for everyone to enter. His mental power had recovered somewhat by now, enough to support him in casting simple magic. Besides meditation, he had even faster methods of recovery. Semi-transparent gray tentacles, about as thick as thumbs, began growing from beneath Saul's cloak, hanging down like stems from a spider plant. These tentacles fell to the ground and automatically began seeking nearby polluted individuals, attaching to the most severely contaminated parts of their bodies. Since over 30 people were already standing in the formation, more than 30 transparent tentacles hung from beneath Saul's cloak. This made him look like a jellyfish from the deep sea. Only his main body was completely hidden under the wide cloak, so no one could see Saul's true appearance at this moment. When the semi-transparent tentacles attached to their bodies, most of the polluted individuals couldn't suppress expressions of terror. But it was too late for them to dodge now. The flexible tentacles would quickly bind any uncooperative patients tightly. The small suckers on the tentacles opened to reveal mouths bristling with dozens of sharp teeth, biting down on the patients' bodies. However, this tearing and biting brought no pain. On the contrary, they gradually felt their violently trembling mental power actually beginning to stabilize. Their disobedient magic power finally began circulating normally within their bodies. The source of all their suffering, the painful wellspring within their bodies, was actually being cleared away bit by bit as it followed the semi-transparent tentacle's absorption. Eid, who had been in a semi-comatose state, opened his eyes. He had thought that, when he woke up this time, his body would become new food for the parasites. He never expected to find himself still intact upon opening his eyes again. Then he saw the tentacle attached to his forehead and was initially startled, thinking he had mutated and grown tentacles from his head. Fortunately, Jia reminded him from nearby. "This is Wizard Saul performing pollution cleansing on us." Eid immediately relaxed, his entire body going limp as he allowed the tentacle to do as it pleased. More and more people like Eid began showing obvious signs of improvement. This scene caused the other wizards who had been hesitant and wary to begin wavering. Finally, more and more people stepped toward the formation. As the treatment continued, and the number of people needing treatment increased, Saul gradually began to feel strained. What strained him wasn't the black tide pollution being absorbed into his body. The pollution that had once given him headaches now, after being absorbed into his body, simply gathered quietly at the tip of his left finger. More precisely, it was hidden at the anchor point in his fingertip. Large amounts of pollution were easily absorbed by the small white anchor point, and the impact on Saul could be completely resolved with just one tremor from his soul body. What truly began to strain Saul was the energy consumption required to maintain his body in this form. However, this was precisely why Saul had required everyone to stand within his advancement formation. Due to the black tide pollution's corrosion, the intricate formation structure had been destroyed, but many of the various materials used to construct the formation, especially the energy materials, were still usable. The black tide hadn't polluted these resources, it had actually nourished them instead. Now, with Saul urgently needing to replenish energy, he extended even more tentacles to directly devour the various resources on the ground. With this energy supplement, Saul could focus wholeheartedly on continuing to treat the others. By the shores of Rhine Lake, beside the dense mushroom forest, one figure hovered high above. His wizard robe remained tightly fitted to his body, despite the fierce wind. Below, nearly 100 gray semi-transparent tentacles extended, connecting to individuals awaiting treatment. Regular magic power fluctuations and powerful mental force created what seemed like a huge transparent dome, encompassing the low-ranking wizards below. This made those who had just been anxious and uneasy feel at peace. Corey stood outside the formation, quietly watching it all. Brando, also a second-rank wizard, stood beside her. "You see, we have a new method besides killing everyone. Your Stargate Council's approach can be withdrawn." Corey glanced sideways. He can save them temporarily, but can he save them forever, even if Saul is already a third-rank wizard? He can't bear black tide pollution indefinitely. However, Corey didn't want to argue with Brando, who inexplicably trusted Saul so much. She brought up another matter. Firefly Lord Herbert's behavior has clearly violated the tribunal's will. They won't let him off. I think we'll see a second new third-rank wizard arriving here. The tribunal wouldn't bother with the selection process like the Stargate Council. Their chief would directly appoint someone, just as they had appointed Herbert initially. Two new third-rank wizards. The borderland might become chaotic again. The three third-rank wizards who had originally occupied the borderland had maintained stable territorial divisions for a long time. Though minor conflicts continued, there were no major wars on the surface. But when new third-rank wizards arrived, competition for resources, conflicts over knowledge and ideologies. All sorts of new contradictions might once again stain the borderland with widespread warfare. Corey, who had failed to become third rank this time, planned to use this opportunity to fish in troubled waters, scheming for resources for her future advancement. She was telling Brando all this precisely because she wanted to form an alliance with him. Both were veteran second-rank wizards who should share the same desire for advancement. But before Brando could respond to Corey's hint, a frivolous voice spoke up behind them. "You don't need to worry about that, hee." Corey and Brando turned around almost simultaneously, adopting defensive postures. Their hearts were filled with shock. Kismet, when did this guy appear behind us? How could there have been no sound at all? Their surprise was understandable. They were both confident in their abilities, and the surroundings were very quiet. There were no chaotic sounds that could have masked Kismet's approach. Yet they still hadn't detected Kismet's approach. If he hadn't suddenly spoken, they wouldn't have noticed that Kismet had almost pressed against their backs. Kismet toyed with the small silver harp in his hands, completely ignoring Corey and Brando's obvious wariness. With a smile, he gazed up at Saul in the sky. The borderland has already welcomed its new master. One third-rank wizard, Saul, is enough for this place. Chapter 696, Your Fourth Rank. Just one third-rank wizard, Corey looked at Kismet warily. Even if Herbert would inevitably be hunted by the tribunal, the wind sprite was still fine for now, and had a deep relationship with Saul. Yet Kismet seemed to know something, smiling noncommittally. Brando looked at Kismet's smile and felt uncomfortable all over. But he couldn't say why. Just as Brando was thinking about helping Saul keep an eye on Kismet, he suddenly heard two melodious string notes. As if the world had suddenly frozen, he knew nothing more. Corey beside him was the same. Two veteran second-rank wizards seemed to become wax figures in an instant, standing motionless in place, no longer speaking. A drop of red liquid emerged from Kismet's chest, slowly expanding until it formed the outline of a woman before him. Yet everyone else present acted as if they couldn't see this woman at all, focusing only on the advancement formation and Saul above. These two began conversing among themselves, standing in place. "You're really not honest, are you?" The blood-colored outline gradually took on the appearance of Sky City's master, Ophelia. "This wizard called Saul before us is the new master of the dead wizard's diary, isn't he?" This time Kismet didn't evade, readily admitting it. "Yes, Saul is my new master." Ophelia wasn't angry at this confirmation, as if she had expected it. "So you approached me before to find backing, making it convenient for you to stir up trouble across the continents, right? Why aren't you pretending anymore?" "Now I don't need." Kismet spoke with Ophelia while his eyes remained fixed on the sky. Ophelia followed Kismet's gaze upward, her blood-red eyes revealing no emotion. "Just another source of nourishment, yet you value him very much." Kismet finally withdrew his gaze, his smile exaggerated and fervent. "Not nourishment." His voice was low and powerful. "He has already broken through the diary's shackles. Now he is the diary's true master, and I am also free." A mere third-rank wizard could break through shackles from a legendary fifth-rank wizard. Ophelia crossed her arms over her chest, feeling that Kismet was spouting nonsense again. A death trap that had been predetermined, yet he managed to break through with his own power. The moment he shattered that predetermined fate, the destiny that bound us was simultaneously broken. Kismet was truly happy. After the original master left, the diary had chosen others. But as if cursed, those people, guided by the diary, walked one by one toward unavoidable death traps. Finally becoming part of the diary. Kismet was also a slave controlled by the diary. Every time a new person became nourishment for the diary, The chains binding him grew another layer. But despite being bound for years, with all his actions and pursuits being predetermined choices of the dead wizard's diary, Kismet had never given up struggling. He would create perfectly timed predicaments for all diary holders, watching them accelerate toward death. If someone could break through the diary's death trap, they would simultaneously snap the diary's controlling leash over its new master. Only by borrowing this opportunity could Kismet possibly escape the diary's control over his will, to become a truly independent consciousness. And for this moment, he had been waiting for who knows how long. If you're not lying, then the dead wizard's diary's curse has been broken. Upon hearing this, Ophelia's gaze toward Saul in the sky gradually grew cold. The dead wizard's diary. A former fifth-rank wizard, a legendary dimensional traveler who could break through world barriers at will. Even the magical artifact he left behind when departing this world was equally coveted by fourth-rank wizards. If not for fear of the powerful curse that new diary masters would never meet good ends, how could Ophelia have allowed such a powerful item to remain unclaimed, only observing without taking possession? And now, Kismet was telling her that the fate-like curse on the diary had actually been broken by Saul. Could she now perhaps? Ophelia's plan was still just a thought in her heart when she suddenly felt a crisis like a sharp arrow, directly penetrating her consciousness. Her murderous and thieving thoughts were pinned firmly at the bottom of her heart. The blood-colored Ophelia turned her head in shock. Kismet. When Kismet had suddenly appeared behind Corey and Brando earlier, his mysterious bearing had surprised those two greatly. But they only thought Kismet was a very powerful second-rank wizard with superior methods, not thinking further. But Ophelia was different. Although what appeared here was only part of her divided consciousness, she keenly sensed the difference when Kismet released his mental power. The curse was broken and the restraints on you disappeared too. Ophelia's blood-red eyes stared intently at the silver-haired man holding the harp. Your current strength, third rank. Kismet turned the harp in his hands as if playing with a toy. Yes, the restraints are gone. I can finally act according to my own will. No need to think every day about how to create pages of fate, how to find generation after generation of new diary masters, then attempt to kill them at just the right moment, while simultaneously hoping they could overcome the fate cursed by the diary. He paused, looking at Ophelia. Are you trying to transmit this information back to your main body? Ophelia laughed melodiously. Yes, you're much more perceptive than before. Of course, I must quickly relay this information back. With you being so frank, you never intended to let my divided consciousness remain, did you? Kismet pursed his lips. You're as careful as ever, but there's one thing. He raised his hand, somehow now holding a ball of mist in his palm. This ball of mist darted left and right, but couldn't leave Kismet's palm. Though you reacted quickly, I was also prepared. Kismet suddenly pressed this ball of mist onto his harp. The strings began playing automatically, without anyone touching them. The music was confined between the two of them, still unnoticed by others. As if the two were actually in another world. The blood-colored Ophelia laughed softly again. It seems your strength has once again exceeded my expectations. Your fourth rank. Kismet didn't deny it. Really, I can only say this is worthy of a powerful fifth-rank wizard who could ignore world barriers. Even subordinates left behind in the original world have fourth-rank strength. Truly enviable. It seems I cannot return alive today, and this shocking news cannot be transmitted to my main body either. Ophelia wasn't enraged by this. Instead, she changed her attitude toward Kismet. This was the respect due to the strong. Then, if we can meet formally next time. Ophelia extended her right hand to Kismet. This expressed recognition and respect. Perhaps we can cooperate in a different way. Kismet smiled gently. also extending his right hand to touch the blood-colored palm. But the next second, the blood-colored Ophelia opposite him was suddenly shattered into powder by an extremely subtle yet high-frequency vibration wave. She disappeared with a bang. Kismet's smile gradually widened. "We'll talk about it then." But the next second his smile vanished. Saul had completed treatment for everyone in the formation. With a teleport, he didn't first settle the others but instead teleported directly in front of Kismet. He glanced at the motionless Corey and Brando, his masked face revealing no emotion. "Kismet, shall we chat?" Chapter 697, Causality. Kismet looked at Saul with a somewhat complex expression. "Very well, my dear master." Both figures disappeared simultaneously, reappearing at the top of the Purity Wizard Tower. "Let's make a deal." Saul raised his hand, and a dark red hardcover book suddenly appeared in his palm. The Dead Wizard's Diary. The first time it officially appeared in this world. Previously, it could only be seen by its own master. But now, Saul could brazenly take it out without restraint. Even making it public wouldn't matter. Because now he finally clearly sensed the diary's existence. It was a substantial power, no longer an untouchable phantom. Actually, Saul had clearly felt the diary's transformation as early as when he successfully sealed the Storm Eye. No longer the aloof, cold prophet, but truly controllable power. Although the diary's complete power level was at least 4th rank, and his current strength couldn't fully command it, at least it wasn't like before when he knew nothing, acting blindly and passively following the diary's instructions. Now, with Herbert dead, Payer out of this world, with no way to return temporarily, and Rhine Lake's pollution crisis resolved, Saul finally had time to deal with the diary and Kismet's problem. "Honestly, I didn't expect you to still be here." Saul opened the diary, this time gently turning the white pages with his own fingers. The pages felt delicate, like an infant's skin. Saul looked at the text in the diary, his past adventures and death-defying experiences. His heart was filled with emotion. "If I'm not mistaken, when I emerged from the Storm Eye, your connection with the diary had already been severed. However, before it was severed, the information transmitted to me revealed that you were actually, originally, a 4th-rank wizard, weren't you?" "Yes." Unlike when facing Ophelia's divided consciousness, Kismet now appeared very honest, as if he had become a different person. "While seeing the diary clearly, I also saw the chains binding you to it. So everything you did before was in service to the diary." Kismet touched his nose. It wasn't quite that miserable. Saul chuckled softly, not reminding Kismet how many times he had previously lamented his tragic fate. "Now, all the chains binding you to the diary have been severed, but you haven't completely escaped the diary, have you? Otherwise, you should have immediately left the diary's vicinity the moment you broke free, completely unsealing yourself. Having just mastered the diary, you've already discovered so much information." Hearing Saul's blunt words, Kismet exhaled. "My dear master, you're truly suitable to be the diary's new owner. The deal you want to make with me is to help me completely escape the diary, isn't it?" Kismet had already guessed something and asked in return. "Correct," Saul nodded. "I don't know how the diary's original controller sealed part of your soul within the diary, but I do indeed have a way to help you retrieve that part of your soul." Saul extended his hand, and the diary in his palm flipped rapidly until reaching the last page. After the 4th black page was turned, where the book's back cover should have been, a 5th black page suddenly appeared. Unlike the previous pages, this page seemed to have been torn in half by someone, leaving only half remaining. But even this half was completely different from the other, somewhat rough-edged black pages. It was like carefully cut black obsidian, crystal clear throughout, yet with metallic elasticity. Saul flicked it lightly with his finger, producing a clear, string-like sound. The wizard who created the Dead Wizard's Diary was truly remarkable, controlling consciousness entities as powerful as you. However, for me, though you're powerful, you're uncontrollable and no longer suitable to continue residing in a diary that completely belongs to me. Saul gently waved the black page in his hand, watching Kismet's gaze follow the page's movement. Moreover, if I continue using this black page to control you, I will only be counterattacked by you who is now free control, right? Kismet touched his chin. Since Saul had already discovered the truth, he no longer needed to consider how to deceive him. Perhaps sometimes, being sincere and straightforward could be more efficient. Well, you already know almost everything, so what do I need to exchange for my freedom? After speaking, Kismet sat down directly, elbows on his knees, chin resting on the back of his hands. He was waiting for Saul to name his price. Of course, something of equal value. Saul put away the diary, and it disappeared from his hand as if it had never existed. You help me advance to 4th rank, and you, the 4th rank wizard, can regain your freedom. Kismet. He really wanted to ask Saul where the equivalence was between these two things. But looking at Saul's demeanor, he probably had no room for bargaining. If Saul still didn't know about the part of his soul in the diary, Kismet would have had opportunities for schemes, but now. Then let's sign a contract. Kismet's face once again showed a smile. Otherwise, how can I trust you? Seeing the leisurely smile on Kismet's face, Saul didn't feel the security of a completed deal. Having dealt with Kismet for so many years, he had gained some understanding of this person's character. When he smiled like this, he was probably already scheming in his heart. But Saul wanted Kismet's assistance in continuing his advancement. This task was difficult and full of danger. The slightest oversight could result in death. He didn't want Kismet to have any ulterior motives or leave any hidden dangers regarding this matter. So Saul summoned the Dead Wizard's Diary once more. Kismet looked up, seeing the diary in Saul's hand again, a flash of wariness passing through his smiling eyes. This little master's actions often exceeded his expectations, causing Kismet to maintain full vigilance when facing him. However, when he saw Saul's next action, he was completely stunned. Saul actually opened the diary to the last page again. Then, he tore off that half page as crystal clear as black obsidian. With a light flick of his index and middle fingers, the half page shot toward Kismet's face like a dart. Until the last second, until that half page was almost about to pierce Kismet's forehead, he finally reacted and caught Saul's flying page. This time Kismet was truly confused and stunned by Saul's operation. Even after catching the half-black page that sealed his soul, he couldn't believe what had just happened. Why? The thing he had yearned for hundreds of years, the soul he thought would require decades more scheming, had just so lightly returned to his hands. Unlike the wild joy when the chain snapped earlier, Kismet now only felt empty. As if everything was just a dream that would end with a blink of an eye. No particular reason, Saul said calmly. I've completed my part of the transaction. Now it's your turn to slowly fulfill your promise. I haven't agreed yet. Kismet pouted, his tense back also relaxing. Though he hadn't agreed verbally, his hand tightly gripped his half-black page. Saul wasn't as relaxed as he appeared on the surface. What he had just thrown out was probably worth half the borderland. He looked at Kismet, slowly narrowing his eyes. In his vision, he once again became a complex tangle of light lines, while Kismet's body also tremulously showed a semi-transparent light line, hesitant yet having no choice, extending toward Saul and connecting with one of the line ends from Saul's light tangle. Fate Line's second application, Causality Achieved. Chapter 698, The Stargate Opens 1. Saul had always thought he learned fate lines through the dead wizard's diary. But the voice in the prismatic world informed Saul that he himself possessed complete, concentrated fate lines. The dead wizard's diary had actually been drawn to his side because of this inherent nature of his. In the prismatic world, Saul gained further understanding of his fate line's characteristics, vaguely developing their second property beyond prophecy. He named it causality. To explain in simple terms, no one can owe him anything. Now that Kismet had received the half-black page Saul gave him, it was equivalent to accepting Saul's deal. Since Saul had already completed his part of the transaction, Kismet now owed him. So next, guided by the fate lines, Kismet would inevitably do his utmost to help Saul advance to 4th rank. Until Saul successfully advanced or died unexpectedly, only then would this karma be settled. Kismet, after his fate line merged with Saul's light tangle, vaguely sensed something. But because fate lines existed so mysteriously, he wasn't entirely clear what Saul had done. However, regardless, the fragment of soul he'd been missing for hundreds of years had finally returned to his hands. Kismet let out a long breath, his frivolous smile disappearing once again. People who unilaterally complete deals are really annoying. Saul nodded. "Thank you for the compliment, I learned from you." Kismet clicked his tongue, having to accept this result. Well then, we have many things to do next. Having accepted Saul's deal, Kismet actually became proactive. "My dear Master MMM, until you enter 4th rank and complete the transaction, you're still my master." He smiled again, plucking the strings with his fingertips, producing pleasant but discordant sounds. "But before we prepare for advancement, you still have a big trouble to deal with." Saul walked to the edge of the circular platform, looking at the crowd of wizards across Rhine Lake. The wizards and apprentices he had just cleansed of black tide pollution were now lying within the advancement formation, stabilizing their soul bodies that had been abnormal due to pollution. Some had already recovered from their abnormal state, but none had left. They all stood by Rhine Lake, outside the mushroom forest, quietly gazing at Saul standing on the highest circular platform of the Purity Wizard Tower. They were silent, but their eyes burned with fervor, as if looking at a god who had saved the world. Saul could treat black tide pollution. This was a remarkable ability, but not enough to inspire such reverence. What was truly terrifying about Saul was that he could simultaneously treat hundreds of people, while seemingly suffering no negative effects himself. This meant that in the pollution-plagued borderland, Saul was a protective lock for everyone's lives. As long as they pledged allegiance to Saul, wouldn't they no longer need to worry about pollution? This would solve their greatest crisis in the borderland. From then on, they could enjoy the rich magical resources here while no longer worrying about pollution. This was equivalent to directly transforming the borderland from a dead land into a fertile one. "I know what trouble you're referring to." Though he had advanced to 3rd rank, revealing his pollution treatment abilities would certainly bring Saul some trouble. But if he wanted to advance to 4th rank in the future, without occupying the resources here, relying on just one wizard tower would make it very difficult to accumulate enough resources for continued advancement and research. This could be seen from the resources consumed in this 3rd rank advancement. Such massive supplies would take decades for Saul to accumulate alone. Yet the Stargate Council could prepare everything in just a few months. The vast difference between individual and collective power was so starkly evident. "Even if I have to face questioning and covetousness from the Stargate Council and Tribunal, I can't hide anymore." Feeling the burning gazes of the crowd, Saul slowly turned around. "With Herbert dead and Payer missing, I'm now the only 3rd rank wizard left in the borderland." He said word by word, "But from now on, one 3rd rank wizard is enough for the borderland." Kismet's shoulders shook twice. "I understand your meaning. From now on, the borderland has its true master. Kismet didn't care about his actual fourth-rank wizard identity, placing one hand on his chest and bowing to Saul. Master of the Purity Tower, Lord Saul. He maintained his bowing posture while raising his head. I guarantee that the Tribunal and Stargate Council won't have the mood to trouble you for the next 3 years. Saul nodded. After 3 years, I'll make them understand that only I, as master of the borderland, am the most suitable choice for everyone. Kismet smiled, slowly straightening up. I have no doubt about that. Additionally, I have 2 more things to inform you. Saul smiled inwardly. Sure enough, with causality's binding, this guy has become much more proactive. The first matter, the Wind Sprite's mutation is unrelated to the Borderlands' black tide. Mentioning Peyer, Saul's expression grew serious. I've already discovered this. Kismet didn't know Saul had been to the prismatic world, but he trusted Saul's abilities. Yes, what truly caused the Wind Sprite's mutation was the Stargate opened by the Stargate Council. The Stargate Council opened the Stargate. Kismet told Saul a secret about the Wind Sprite's origins. The Wind Sprite was an artificial life form, with half her bloodline coming from sprites. The other half came from a mad fourth-rank wizard who was a devoted seeker of Stargates. He chose the Wind Sprite precisely for the Sprite race's characteristics. They were naturally sensitive to spatial changes. This was why the Wind Sprite was chosen to station long-term in the borderland, because of her sensitivity to storm eyes. However, the Stargate Council later discovered something else. They found that when storm eyes appeared in the borderland, the Stargate in the sky would also manifest. If a storm eye fully erupted, the Stargate would be affected and open a crack. The Stargate Council needed this opportunity to understand the other world connected to this world's Stargate. Other world. This was the first time Saul heard such a concept, so wizards led by Alec want to find new worlds. Seeking is a nicer way to put it. The less pleasant term is fleeing. Kismet plucked the strings, holding them taut. This world has been restricted by the Abyssal Eye. It can no longer open passages through world barriers from within and can only rely on external forces. He raised one finger. Escaper has gathered adventurers led by the Stargate Council who only want to use Stargates to flee to other worlds. Kismet raised a second finger. Nefrit consists of conservatives who only know how to appease the world's will, wanting to use this world's origin to oppose the Abyssal Eye. Originally, the Stargate Council's adventurers wanted to use Clark's special dream abilities to observe the world behind the Stargate. Unfortunately, Clark's advancement would threaten the Glare family's interests. Plus, your master Gorsa didn't favor rashly exploring new worlds, so he was destined to be sacrificed. Thus Peyer, the Wind Sprite who had successfully regained her will, became the Stargate Council's second choice. Oh, also strongly recommended by Sky City's master. Saul narrowed his eyes. Recommended for what? Recommended for implanting Stargate coordinates in Peyer. Once a storm eye appeared and affected the Stargate coordinates in Peyer, the Council could immediately detect the Stargate opening and proceed with the next experiment. Sending test objects there as the first step in exploring the other world. But Peyer, as the signal conductor, would inevitably become the first sacrifice. She would die under the dual pollution of starlight and black tide, Kismet said calmly. Chapter 699, The Stargate Opens 2. So now the Stargate Council and Sky City originally thought Peyer would die immediately after the black tide erupted in the borderland. Yes, Kismet smiled, but they probably didn't expect that the person who should have been the first sacrifice would, through your influence, survive by a twist of fate. I suppose destiny played a joke on them. Kismet even knew the inside story of how Peyer survived, due to his influence. Did he also know about his origins and information about the prismatic world? He probed, how do you know Payer didn't die? Kismet almost immediately guessed what Saul was worried about, and he bowed again. Please don't worry, I cannot spy on your actions. The reason I discovered the wind sprite didn't die was entirely because. He waved the half-black page in his hand. I can sense that the connection between the wind sprite and you hasn't been severed. You rewrote the wind sprite's death sentence. I think this probably relates to your special identity. After all, you're a miraculous existence who made the diary directly break free from my control. Is it because before I came to this world, I was once a life form of fate lines? Saul pondered silently. Now, information about his past seemed to have lifted its veiling mist. But the complexity and mystery within didn't reduce his inner doubts one bit. Kismet, do you know about my past? The other shook his head. I'd love to know too, but my intuition tells me not to think about such distant matters before heading to the stars. Intuition. Is this your ability or an ability granted by the diary? However, Kismet didn't seem to want to discuss this topic, turning his head and stiffly changing the subject. The wind sprite isn't dead, so now it's the Stargate Council's turn to have a headache. Kismet still had secrets. But as long as he didn't scheme regarding helping with fourth-rank advancement, Saul had no intention of probing into secrets others were unwilling to reveal. He naturally continued. Payer was used, simultaneously connected to both Black Tide and the Stargate. Originally, this connection would quickly dissipate due to Payer's death. But now, she hasn't died. Even though she's no longer in a normal wizard state, because she's still alive, the connection between Black Tide and the Stargate hasn't been severed. Hearing Saul's speculation, Kismet smiled and licked his lips, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Yes, the good show is about to begin. But Saul felt no excitement at all. He thought of what Camus had said when trying to stop him. Does a more dangerous monster exist behind the Stargate? Will this world be destroyed because of it? The world definitely won't be destroyed, but with the Stargate opened, what happens to the people in this world is uncertain. Saul felt somewhat uneasy. The current wizard world already struggled against the Black Tide, let alone adding starlight pollution. He came to the platform edge again, seeing Byron's group carrying the motionless Brando and Corey toward the wizard tower. Those two had obviously encountered some problem. When Saul went to find Kismet earlier, he had noticed their abnormality. Seeing they weren't in mortal danger, just held by some spell, he hadn't rushed over. He continued speaking to Kismet. We need to sever this connection. Besides killing Payer, do you have other methods? Killing Payer was no longer an option to consider. Even if Saul were willing to sacrifice her to cut the connection, he couldn't find her now. She was currently in the prismatic world, working hard on self-repair. Not even her fragments could be gathered. Kismet wasn't worried at all. You needn't be so concerned. The wizards of this wizard world aren't that incompetent. Just leave this matter to the Stargate Council and Tribunal. Saul understood. Heh, this is what you meant by them having no time or energy to trouble me for 3 years. Kismet smiled cunningly. Yes, as long as they're kept busy, naturally they won't have time to meddle in other affairs. I'm quite skilled at causing trouble for others. Then he bid farewell to Saul. My dear master, I must go. After all, helping you advance to 4th rank isn't a task that can be completed with just words. It seems I won't be able to rest properly for the next few years. Before leaving, he remembered something else. Oh right, this is for you. Kismet drew 2 slender golden straws from his palm. With a wave of his hand, the straws unfolded into 2 golden pages, quickly turning into fine glittering powder and disappearing. Simultaneously, Saul sensed 2 more golden pages in his diary. I hadn't given you these 2 golden pages before because I didn't want you to be too deeply influenced by the diary. But now that you've completely mastered the diary and don't need to worry about becoming its nourishment, I can safely give you the remaining pages." Looking at his empty palm, Kismet was briefly dazed, but soon showed a smile again. "From now on, if you want to weave new pages of fate, you'll have to rely on yourself." Kismet raised both arms high, stretching. "Doing one thing for over 100 years is really tiring." Saying this, he slowly walked to the platform edge, leaped and jumped down. Accompanied by a few lonely string notes, Kismet's figure bounded a few times and disappeared across the plains. Meanwhile, council personnel who had already sent test objects, codenamed anchor points, to the other side of the Stargate, were nervously waiting for the anchor points to transmit back information from the other world. But the wizards responsible for observing the Stargate's condition grew increasingly tense. Finally, one of them shot up, bypassing various people and objects on the observation platform, heading directly to the inverted pyramid building above to find the Stargate Council's chairman. After passing through multiple checkpoints, this wizard almost ran all the way to Chairman Alec. "Chairman, an accident occurred in the experiment. Currently, the Stargate hasn't closed as planned." Alec sat on a long bench, and because the room's gravity direction had been rotated 90 degrees, he constantly faced the sky. Murich stood beside the chairman. Hearing this, he turned back, his telescope-like eye rapidly adjusting focus. "The chairman has already noticed." Murich was rapidly flipping through scrolls in his hands, while several quill pens floated beside him, writing quickly without control. "The current problem is that the coordinates the Council used to locate the Stargate established a connection with the Wind Sprite. The Wind Sprite is now missing but hasn't died, so the connection wasn't severed, leaving the Stargate temporarily with a crack. Perhaps this crack will close automatically in an hour, but accidents might occur, and it might not close again." Murich apologetically said to Alec, "I'm very sorry, Chairman. I didn't expect Wind Sprite Payer could survive under dual pollution." Alec waved his hand. "If experiments developed according to our predetermined designs, they wouldn't be called experiments." Alec didn't rise, his voice remaining calm. "No one can guarantee what results an experiment will yield. However, the Stargate not completely closing isn't entirely bad news." Everyone quietly waited for Alec's instructions. "We can begin second phase testing," Alec said, his voice faintly carrying thunder. "Activate the anchor point's feedback information." While others were still shocked, First Assistant Murich already wore a smile. "Yes, Chairman." He began rapidly recording again. "The Stargate not completely closing is good news. No more worrying about signal clarity." Then Alex spoke again. "If the Stargate never closes, and the returned signals show danger levels below grade 3. Everyone looked up, some anxious, some anticipating. "Then send people for gap observation." The messenger wizard felt his legs go weak, tremblingly asking, "Chairman, don't we need to convene the member council? Proceeding directly to gap observation, isn't the pace too fast?" Murich was an absolute supporter of the Stargate chairman. Seeing someone object, his eyes immediately focused on the other's face. But Alec wasn't angry, calmly explaining, "Only when conducting crossing experiments do we need to convene the member council. This was decided before Stargate experiments began. As for pace, we need to prepare as thoroughly as possible. You never know which will arrive first, tomorrow, or the black tide." Chapter 700, You Are Free. Dark and damp. Water droplets struck the glass window, forming slanted water lines. More and more water lines appeared, accompanied by pitter-patter sounds, then splashing. The sounds grew louder and denser. It was raining. Haywood lifted his head from his papers, staring blankly at the gloomy sky outside and the strings of black raindrops beneath it. The ink pen suspended in his hand was soaked with ink, now rapidly forming a drop due to gravity that was about to fall onto the turmeric-colored parchment. "It's raining again. There's been so much rain this year." The ink finally gave in to gravity, dropping from the pen tip. Swishy. A long black tongue suddenly shot out, swept away the ink drop, and retracted into a pitch-black face where no features could be seen. "You're spacing out again." The black shadow plopped down on the parchment she had just protected, completely unconcerned about whether she might wrinkle it. "So what if there's more rain? What does that have to do with us? That's something for the high-ranking wizards on the Sighing Wall to worry about." With his sister Heidi blocking his writing parchment, Haywood simply tossed his ink pen back into the pen holder. He leaned back, saying helplessly, "Yes, no matter how much rain there is, it's not something two wizard apprentices like us can solve." Having come to the Sighing Wall for several years now, Haywood still hadn't broken through the barrier between apprentice and true wizard. Over these years, the only change that had occurred was his sister Heidi being separated from his body, and, imitating Lady Yura's former appearance, transformed into a black silhouette. Though still not completely human in appearance, at least Heidi now had brief periods of independent activity. She just needed to return to her brother Haywood periodically to replenish her consumed mental power. The two had accepted the fact that they couldn't become true wizards, living safely under Master Gorsa's protection on this dangerous sea for a long time. But Haywood had been restless lately. For some reason, ever since Gorsa returned from outside last year, he always felt his peaceful days were coming to an end. A month ago, Gorsa had even requested leave from Murphy, the master of the Sighing Wall, retreating to the lowest level of the Wizard Tower to conduct experiments. He hadn't even emerged to fight during the most recent Black Tide attack. Haywood knew that this time, Master Gorsa would achieve his long-held goal. This time, no one else knew the progress of the experiment. Even Haywood, who had always followed Gorsa, wasn't clear about it. But what he did know was that Gorsa wouldn't let anyone else interfere with his experiment this time. This time, Gorsa hadn't let a third person help throughout the entire process. Maybe this time Lady Yura can truly be revived. Haywood paused, looking at his sister, who resembled a black silhouette. "Heidi, do you want to be revived?" The faceless black shadow let out cold laughter that would be enough to frighten several timid humans to death in the ordinary world. Hehehehehe, revival. I'm fine as I am now, why would I want to be revived? If revival means becoming a person in pain, then I'd rather happily remain a vengeful spirit. Haywood was stunned because he lacked the ability to revive Heidi. Therefore, he had never asked this question before. Today, he had spoken on impulse, never expecting Heidi to hold such a view. Even Heidi could see how much pain Lady Yura suffered from the constant revival experiments. How could Master Gorsa not see it? So was Master Gorsa really choosing to revive her because he loved his wife? "Lanta!" A painful, shrill scream came from underground. Haywood and Heidi looked at each other, their bodies trembling lightly as fear, accompanied by that scream, gradually crept into their veins. Both simultaneously looked down, pretending they heard nothing as usual. However, the screaming that usually lasted several minutes today only rang out once. Outside the Sighing Wall, at the bottom of the 7th Wizard Tower, Gorsa shook the test tube in his hand, then took a long dropper and dripped one drop of liquid onto the forehead of the female body on the experiment table. The colorless, transparent liquid instantly disappeared beneath the pale skin. "Lanta!" The woman struggled violently, but lying on the magical formation, she couldn't even move her little finger. Gorsa tilted his head, carefully studying the woman, unwilling to miss the slightest change in her. Strangely, today this test subject only screamed once, then quieted down, staring blankly at the ceiling. This change also caught Gorsa's attention. Finally beginning to merge, a slight smile tugged at his lips as he bent down, his slender hands cupping the woman's pale face. Don't sleep. Complete fusion is true revival. The woman's pupils trembled as they moved, her purple lips producing a weak whisper. Revival. Yes, the experiment has gone smoothly so far. This time you'll definitely succeed in reviving. Gorsa stood up to check behind the woman. On the pale, naked back, a brown branch grew like a sprout breaking through soil. The branch followed a deliberately left hole in the experiment table, drilling into a square box below. The box contained a gelatinous culture medium, mixed black and red, emitting a fresh fruit fragrance. Careful observation revealed this gelatin was trembling slightly, with a heartbeat rhythm. With each tremor, nutrients traveled through the branch into the woman's body, making it radiate vitality like a truly living human form. Confirming the culture medium was in good condition with sufficient energy, Gorsa looked at the woman again, gently encouraging her. Yura, I know you're in pain now, but success is within reach. Once you complete the fusion, you'll be free. Free. This long-lost word gave the woman strength. She suddenly opened her eyes wide, staring fixedly at Gorsa. 1 second, 2 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. The wind and rain outside the tower couldn't affect the two people in the basement at all. Finally, a familiar mental power fluctuation emanated from the woman. Gorsa immediately stepped forward, pressing one hand to the woman's forehead, closing his eyes to feel her solidified soul. That's right, this is it. The body birthed through the combination of Black Sea tree source and Red Sea tree source has extremely strong compatibility, with almost no backlash against soul inhabitation. Plus this, quite powerful, extremely domineering adhesive, your soul has completely fused with this magical creation. He straightened up, his face showing emotion and relief. Simply put, congratulations, you've come back to life. The woman, or rather the finally revived Yura, felt the power brought by her new body. When her soul broke through the last barrier and completely fused with this artificial body, the previous feeling of powerlessness disappeared. It was replaced by abundant energy, as if waking up after sufficient sleep. With slight effort, Yura actually sat up. The branch behind her stretched but didn't break. The culture medium below continued trembling slightly, like her external heart. Though there was still some pain throughout her body, this couldn't affect Yura's joy. Once for magical research, Yura had easily given up her life. Later, when she suffered endless torment for the sake of revival, she understood the preciousness of life. Yura's eyes welled up as she felt liquid flowing down from the corners of her eyes. Even tears. Yura touched the corner of her eye with her fingertip, then looked at the transparent liquid on it, causing even more tears to flow. I really came back to life. Gorsa crossed his arms, smiling. All right, don't keep crying, or the culture fluid will flow out through your eyes. Yura froze, her movement stiffening. This body isn't truly a human body after all, so some special reactions are normal. You can consider yourself as having changed species, but you're still Yura. Yura quickly wiped the tears from her face, feeling somehow empty inside. This was already a good ending. Then she heard Gorsa's voice again. Gentle, slow, firm. Now you're free, you can leave. She raised her eyes, confusion filling them. What, leave what? Across from her, her lover in life and enemy in death, softly repeated. Leave my wizard tower. After all, the experiment is over, isn't it?